Hello there, Sir from 17 once again. This is my Alan Wake, Nightmare difficulty, pistol only, or handgun only, no batteries, no HUD. This is the very beginning of the game. It is episode 1, it's called Nightmare, and we're going to be playing on the PC using a GPRO X SUPERLIGHT and testing out a glorious white mousepad. But the beginning here is all tutorial, all introduction, and I'm going to be jumping between encounter to encounter with almost nothing in between. Alan Wake is a very ambitious game. It's got all kinds of interesting gimmicks and moments and deviations of the norm going on with its gameplay and the way that the player navigates its world, and I'm going to be trimming most of those out. Right now the footage is a little choppy on this starting capture here, so I do apologise about that, guys. Luckily it's just a tutorial, so it doesn't matter too much. OBS was definitely going hard here. But this is Alan Wake. Some of you might have been anticipating it, some of you might have expected it, some of you might not have. The game recently got a remaster, I don't know if you noticed, because it's 10 years old now, and I tried to play the remaster on PC, but the port was kind of lacking in several ways and I couldn't get it to work the way I wanted it to, so I was forced to not touch it. So coming back to the game was something I'd wanted to do for a long time, but I'd been unable to do, and the other day I was thinking what would be a great project for 10 years on YouTube then to go into the very game that started my channel, because Alan Wake DLC was the first walkthrough I ever put out. And I never covered the main game because it was slightly before my YouTube time. And then we find ourselves skipping forward now, making a guide which I simply could not have made before. Which I think is a nice sense of progression. And it's the hardest difficulty, a standard I always adhered to, and it has commentary throughout, another standard I always adhered to, but it shows both editing techniques and gameplay restrictions that I kind of matured into by doing this. As we take on this guy looks a lot like the tutorial man, doesn't he? Like the hitchhiker that you have to kill at the start. But we take him out and then we transition into a running sequence. There is a spawn that happens there, an ambient spawn, where when you get to the end, if you're quite slow, you can spawn 2 extra dudes. I actually wanted to get that fight in this footage, but unfortunately OBS had just completely mangled it when I went back to re-record, because I had to re-record this introduction 3 times. And then when I came back for this one, which is the one that you're now watching, I ended up not getting that spawn, and I wasn't entirely certain as to why. A lot of the mechanics in this game are quite interesting, especially when it comes to those ambient spawns that happen when you're out in the open world, and they are signified by some mechanics that we'll talk about when we get into this, but we're coming up on the patron crawl, so enjoy. Here we are anyhow, moving forward. This has been the first of the progression jumps that you're going to witness. The only things you're going to be seeing in this guide are the combat sections and the areas where you can feasibly take damage. So we've jumped all the way towards this lumberyard and we're taking on one of the heavy enemies along with just a standard taken. So as you might imagine, the creatures in this game have been possessed by darkness, and they are enveloped in something known as the Darkness Shroud, which is something you need to use your torch to get rid of. Once you break their shield, they will then get rid of their immunity, and then you can go in and shoot them with any conventional weapon. Alan Wake features several weapons of varying qualities, but we're going to be using this bad boy for the whole run. Of course I will still be using flares and I still will be using flashbangs, because there are certain parts of the game where I think sometimes to even survive it's kind of necessary to use those items. But not that it would have made much of a difference, because I would have still used them because they're really fun and I love how they look. And as fun as challenge runs are, and this is a challenge run, I'm not doing this to impress people, guys. It's not meant to be a big waving my dick around. It's meant to make it a bit more enjoyable to watch. If I were to make a straight walkthrough of Alan Wake now, there would be no real need for it because there's a million of those on YouTube and you've probably already seen them and you probably didn't need them to begin with. So instead I thought I'd come along and do something interesting and a bit more exotic, and alas, here we are with this segmented damage run. And for the people that watch this and think I did this all in one attempt, that's not how it works, guys. Once again, I'm not here to mislead you, I'm not here to lie to you. I'm here to tell you that I got hit a lot in this game because this game is cheap as fuck, and some parts were incredibly annoying. But I did manage to get it done, and hopefully it'll be worth the watch. And this is the first sequence introducing the concept of not fighting every battle. So you'll notice on the screen right now that the darkness is built, the distortion effects have been playing, and the audio is telegraphing that they're about to spawn taken on top of you. And that's exactly what you just witnessed there, guys. When you hear that rushing wind, when you see the reality distorting, it means you're about to get spawned on, and those spawns can be a nightmare depending on how lucky and unlucky you are. And the idea is quite simple. The enemies, when you want to do those running sequences, if you boost your torch by holding the trigger, you can stun enemies that aren't shielding themselves, and it will disorientate them for a few moments, and then you can get an advantage. You want to use that to your advantage when it comes to those running away moments. Stun the enemies by boosting the torch for a small moment, and then sprint and get the hell out of there. One of the biggest limitations of Alan's moveset in this game is his movement speed, his running, and just his general slovenliness and lack of stamina. You are not very capable in this game movement-wise. You have a very powerful dodge that can be sporadic and intermittent and will oftentimes fail you, and then you have this sprint that just does not last very long at all, and right here is another one of those dynamic spawns. This is telling me that I'm getting a bunch of taken behind me here. The guys with the sickles that move around quite quickly, they're known as flankers, and then the other guy is just a standard taken. And Nightmare difficulty changes quite a few variables, which I'm going to be going into in the course of this walkthrough, which is quite cool. I have some damage numbers and some statistical differences, which should hopefully make this a bit more interesting. One of the advantages to having that kind of information for a walkthrough such as this is that I can prove without shadow of a doubt that I'm on the difficulty that I say I'm on. And there's a plague on YouTube, and just a difficulty in general that I've faced for 10 years now, for a decade, of people doubting difficulty because they can't do something and they're projecting their own insecurities onto other people. In some games it's really easy to say, oh, this is the hardest difficulty and here's why, whereas other games it can be a lot more ambiguous, and because people like to cheat and they like to take the path of least resistance, it can oftentimes be a case of people lying and scheming and duping folks, which I'm not the biggest fan of. It's something that I really don't believe in. Whereas in Max Payne, the damage that the enemies take tells you what difficulty you're on. And this guy here is our first boss as well. This guy's called Stucky, and he is known as a teleflanker. So the guys in front of us now, they're probably just the normal guys. They might be called ranged dudes, and these guys can throw axes at you. And they can do so with ridiculous accuracy. The axe throwing is probably one of the least fun aspects of this challenge run, purely based off the fact that they're so accurate, they do it so frequently, and they also do it off camera, so you have to be looking at them. And there are times when they'll throw axes at you, you'll know they're throwing an axe, you'll press dodge and it'll still hurt you, because the dodge will leave you hanging. And we'll definitely go into some of this, and I'll talk about these in greater detail, but I'm just going to be outlining some systems here. This guy here is a flanker. See how fast he is? This guy is wearing a tracksuit, and he's got a sickle. These dudes are the pressure units. This is the boss. He's the teleflanker. He's a more aggressive version of those fast guys, and he moves at ridiculous speed. And the idea for this dude is you want to keep your torch on him and chisel away at his shroud, and then bully him once you put him down. The thing with the torch, and the thing that makes this run so unique, is usually in Alan Wake, when your torch starts to falter when you boost it, you can feed it batteries to continue boosting your torch, which is an incredibly powerful technique. And you find batteries everywhere. The whole game's, advertising Energizer. And it says just then, see when it said insert battery? If you boost your torch to its limit and you don't put batteries in it, the torch will fail and it will leave you without light until it regenerates. And this is a really vulnerable place to be, because being able to boost is a free stun, and being able to put your torch on people will weaken their shroud. So by not using batteries, it means the hardest parts in this challenge run for me are going to be moments where I have to use my torch intensively. And you might be thinking of a few parts of this game that you remember being quite difficult just casually, They're not hard. Those parts are absolutely fine. The game gives you so many resources, and if you do it right, it's probably got a decent checkpoint hidden in there, and you can just get on with your life. It's the bits you don't think about that are a pain in the ass, and they're the ones that really come to bite you. But this is us moving forward into episode 2. And this very first fight here, be careful, the black stuff on the ground is darkness, and it does injure Alan. And killing it takes a while because you have to use your torch, and I really don't want to waste my torch. But these first 2 guys here are having a go at us. And to give you some parameters as we move on to the boss coming up here, which is Rusty, the security guy. He's a park ranger, and he's another teleflanker too. But each difficulty dictates how much damage each enemy takes, and how long it takes you to remove their shroud. On Nightmare difficulty, the average time to remove darkness from an enemy is 10 seconds. And I don't know if that's boosted or unboosted, but it's the longest amount of time to remove the shield. And you'll notice when you play it, because it's very noticeable and it's very long. When you come over here and pick this ammo up, Rusty turns up and it's just a standard fight. This is the first instance of a shitty checkpoint as well, because when you beat this guy, that gate goes down and 2 more Taken turn up, and if they hit you, you have to go back to the very start where you took on those 2 guys in the other side of this building, and then you come through and you fight this guy again. So this was the first moment of, yeah, this checkpoint's not very good, this is kind of frustrating. And it's not that it's a difficult fight, it's very manageable, especially when you're warmed up. It's that it takes so long to break the shield with this particular restriction. And then I added the no HUD on top of it, because I think this game looks really nice. Considering this is as old as it is, they really made something special. This game is aging like a fine wine, and I just think it looks aesthetically superb, atmospherically unmatched in some cases, and just super ambitious for the time, super restricted and held back by the machines it was on, and now it's just blossoming like just a delectable flower. But here's Rusty. He's going to take a big old pounding. He's probably going to take 8 to 9 shots, maybe even more. What was that, 2 full clips? That's 12 rounds. Yeah, this guy takes a pounding. Doesn't take that much damage on the other difficulties, and that's how you know. But here is the second spawn here, guys. 2 dudes dropping here. I got hit so many times by them throwing axes that I decided to back up into this area and bait them in here. And then we'll just use the boost to stun them. And then if you can get multiple Taken close together in your beam, you can do 2 people at once with the shield reduction. And then the rest is pretty simple. But these guys are technically classed, I think they're classed as ranged. So if this was normal difficulty, it would take 2 bullets to kill them. I don't know if headshot has a modifier, I don't think it does. I think shooting them anywhere does the same thing. But here is another moment where mobility is going to be your friend. We're going to run through this, and everyone's going to throw shit at me, so be very careful. But if it was on hard, the ranged guys would take 3 bullets, and because it's on Nightmare, they take 4. So 4 rounds pretty much explains the difficulty, and sometimes they take even more. I don't know what that's about. Maybe that guy's just special. But we've got them both stunned here, and we'll hit them as best as we can. When they hold their forearm up like that to block their eyes, you cannot boost stun them, so never waste your boost on that because it's completely worthless. This is the first difficult part of the run. So you come up to this tree, and you immediately get taken on by these guys that are known as assaults. This guy has an axe, or a shovel, and he does not give a shit about your torch, and he will charge you, and the detection on dodging that charge is intermittent to say the least. Right now you'll notice, do you see how the world is shifting and going all Gaussian and adjusting and blurring and really just distorting? That tells you that we're in this kind of Taken fiend zone. So if you linger in areas where the screen gets like this, usually they will do a programmed spawn and dump some Taken on you for like full pursuit or just attack. Other times they'll do this effect to tell you that, you know, you're in a bad zone and it's dangerous, but it's just a debated. But it's best to run this. I actually wanted to kill some of these people because the first time you take on one of those big assault guys with a shovel, I wanted to fight him to show you the kind of techniques that we'll be using and what we'll be doing. This guy's just cruising up to me, so we'll get rid of him. And then now you need to move as quickly as you can to get into the light, because if you don't, you're going to get those ambient spawns, and those ambient spawns are going to make this more difficult. I think, though, judging by how I did this, I think that by having this one guy still alive throwing bullshit at me, I think him being alive might have been cock-blocking any of the other passive spawns, and I'm going to use that to my advantage now to get to the generator coming up. And be very careful, guys, when it comes to activating generators. They generally take 3 pulls to activate, and you will be hit while you're on them. They can throw stuff at you while you're activating them. There's all kinds of really frustrating, cheesy shit that can happen when you think you're safe, but that's a dynamic spawn. See that? The camera's telling me there with that cinematic camera that he's on me. And now I'm just going to keep turning around, blinding him, and hoping he doesn't throw an axe at me. The true difficulty of this challenge run, if you want to do it, is moments like this. When you're running away from the Taken and they just do that. See that? Like, they're so good with those projectiles, it's ridiculous. And then you come here, they turn off the machine, and I'm going to stun this guy, and then I'm going to hit the generator. And then it's going to give me the checkpoint. There are a few sequences, guys, where I activated generators and then got hit, and then when I restarted, I was at the light source, and there was no way to go back and do it, so I didn't get hit at the end of activating the generators. So all I'm going to do on those moments is to do crossfades, because technically I did get to the light, I just got hit in the light. I've also been hit by people throwing stuff at me when I was in the light, which is a fucking nightmare too. But you know, the game is not really designed around how I'm trying to play it. It's very specifically designed, and you're going to run into these issues when you try and do something crazy like this. But this moment here is very tough as well. So you're moving around with this guy who has the gun, and you have to blind people and help him out. That's something I need to say as well. When you strafe and the Taken throw at you, they will always throw where you're going to be instead of where you are. So a really good strategy when you see them start to throw is to, at the last possible moment, shift direction, and you'll probably dodge things naturally. But I would always try and use the dodge, because if you don't, you're going to get tagged. This sequence here too, do not rush. If you rush up here, the spawns get too out of hand, and stunning people on a base torch is just not going to... Look at that, dude. Cheeky buggers. I swear to God, the stuff they do with these axes, unreal. But if you take this slow, you go bit by bit, it's not too bad. And the sequence coming up is pretty frustrating too, and it's frustrating because you cannot guarantee that this guy's going to hit. And it's one of the one, like, watch him. Sometimes he's really good, sometimes he's really bad. There's no consistency. Like, every second shot he seems to miss. And it leaves you hanging. The literal definition of being left hanging is this dude with his shot and his shot selection. Sometimes though, when he shoots at them, it does seem like he can adjust them and maybe stun them a little bit, but it does say in the instructions when they're tutorializing you that if you shoot at the shrouded Taken, that they don't actually take damage. But pick up the flares. Flares and flashbangs in Alan Wake are incredibly strong, and they're incredibly frequent. I did not realize just how much they give you of these resources. You can probably flare and flashbang the whole game, and there are moments, guys, where it was really tempted to do that, but what I'm going to try to do, I'm going to try my best to use the flares and the flashbangs in interesting and cool ways, and quite sparingly, because I don't want to just flashbang everything and flare and be completely immune like that. That being said, you can get hit when you're flashbanging. And you shouldn't, because it's meant to be immunity, it's meant to push people back. But there are times where their automatic counters supersede the pushback. And you've got to be really careful with that, especially the assault people, the bigger fellas that have the big weapons. They have a push move that they do, where when you're close to them, they just push you. And that will go through flares, that, occasionally. Same with the birds. The birds can hit you through flares. That's happened to me a few times. And sometimes when they throw an axe, of course, if they start throwing an axe as you're activating a flare, you'll just get hit. It's just one of those things. This bit's really hard, though. This is one of the hardest parts of the game. And again, I'd love to say it's hard because it's challenging, but it's hard because you can't guarantee this guy's going to help. And at the beginning here, the first spawn is all the way back here. You want to try and put some pressure on these guys. You've got standard Taken throwing their shit at you, and you've got a couple of flankers. And I think they come in a group of 3 here. So stun them all as best you can and hope this guy does his job. If you get rushed and it feels a bit too stressful, you can use your flares, but I would recommend saving the flares for the spawn with the big fellas. When they spawn the 2 assaults, you want to flare those guys and make sure you get their shrouds down, and then you can put yourself into a better position to get rid of the flankers. I'll say this, guys, because I'm going to share a video of one of the worst spawns I've ever seen in a video game, and I do 5 minutes of fighting at the end of Alan Wake, absolutely decimating, on it, really feeling it, kicking ass, and then it's all clear, and I go to a generator, I start activating it, and they do a cinematic spawn while I'm on the generator, and I get whacked. And the checkpoint's at the very beginning of that fight as well, so all that 5 minutes is gone. And in this walkthrough, when we get there, I'm going to run that sequence, guys, because I didn't do it again. You know, I did it perfectly. Kicked everyone's ass, dominant, get to the end, spawn a flanker on me, and I can't get off the fucking generator quick enough, so I was really pissed off at that. And you need to... This is the two big fellas, by the way. I said big fellas, but it's actually just... It's just two standard taken. But I'm going to use the flares because I want to get as much damage in on the shroud as I can. So I double bag the flares, sorry. Push this guy back as well. Triple flaring right there. And then hopefully this guy kills the guys behind us, like he did just then, and we can work on the dude across the bridge, because now there's a flanker turning up, and there's this guy. So I pop another flare just in case, because I really want this sequence to be done. It's funny as well, isn't it? I said I'm going to try and be sporadic with the flares, and I pop 4. That might be the most flares you'll see me use. You can tell I was getting annoyed at this sequence, can't you? But the spawns in Alan Wake, I really don't have a word for it. Some of the stuff I've seen while I was making this walkthrough are unbelievable. It's some of the craziest, cheesiest stuff, and I'd completely forgotten. Part of me really loves that. It loves that this game still had bite and balls to be an arsehole. That was lucky just then. Nothing I could have really done. I could have shined the torch at him and hoped to get the stun or gone for the dodge, but this is a long sequence and there's no checkpoints. So don't even fuck with this. Just use your flares. This game commits a cardinal sin, in my opinion, which is all of the resources that you pick up, it takes away from you. And there's a few moments towards the end of the game where they keep the stuff that they've given you, but there's so many other instances where that you'll get like 8 or 9 flashbangs, and then you'll fall down a cliff, there'll be a cutscene, and then you'll have nothing, you won't even have a torch. And that's the type of stuff that really, really annoys me. But here is one of those chase sequences. We've got flankers on our heels, we've got all kinds of projectiles coming our way, and it's not that clear at this moment where you're going. One of the cool things about the HUD in this game is it constantly points you to the direction you need to go. When you don't have that, you need to know where you're going or make it up as you go along. I thought this was really weird, because you can't run up that log at all. So I thought the game had put me into some kind of cutscene mode where Alan was going to talk, and it turns out, nope. You just have to get up there really quickly. And be careful grabbing on this generator because it spawns this guy. You should be able to activate the generator before he does anything with you. But every so often you can get hit doing that. And then it despawns them. And then we move forward to this sequence, which is another sequence of us running through the zone here. This level has a couple of optional fights that you can take on. A couple of them are pretty big as well. And if I was just doing standard Nightmare no damage, using all the weapons and using batteries, then I would have done probably every single fight and I wouldn't have batted an eyelid. But because I can't use batteries and because I'm using the pistol, there are moments where you don't have the ammo to do a lot of the fights. Usually, you don't have any issues with ammo if you're accurate, but there's a couple of moments on those bonus encounters where I was running low, and if you don't have flares or flashbangs, you get into a situation where you can't win. And I ended up restarting a few fights like that, just purely based off the fact there was a bit too much to kill. That spawn was not cool. Back on the ammo topic though. It is not the rule running out of ammunition in the fights. The game is very generous when it comes to filling your pockets with tools to fight back. And speaking of fighting back, I get myself in a bad situation here and I have to pop a flare. It's just because of the climbing and the collision. This is a game from 2009, 2010, and the jumping in Remedy's games and the navigating and climbing objects is really spotty and really strange. So it was like hitting a brick wall and there was nothing much to really do about it. But here is another big fella. This guy is going to take 13 shots to kill potentially. We'll see whether or not he does, or if that's just the chainsaw variant. He might just take the... Is it 8 shots? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 2 more. 7, 8. Yeah, the chainsaw guy takes more. So he is an 8-shot kill, that dude. And on hard mode, he takes 6 bullets. And on normal mode, he takes 4 bullets. And apparently, The difference between the Shroud as well on those earlier difficulties, on hard mode, it's 8 seconds instead of 10, and then on normal, I think it's 6 seconds. Don't quote me on those, guys. They're available on the wiki. I don't know whether or not the wiki is 100% fact, truth, scientific. It's as well as I can understand. But just know that when you play on Nightmare, you are going to notice that you have to shine the torch on them for longer. You're going to notice they take a lot more damage. It's just the way it works. And then we have another one of the sledgehammers, and then his buddy next to him just there, so we've got double sledgehammers now. I like this enemy quite a lot, I don't mind it. My only critique is the charge. I wish you could do more things to the charge. I feel like there was a whole host of mechanical richness they could have gone with that they kind of forgot to do. And we're going to talk about mechanics, because there's quite a lot to say, and there's quite a lot I want to ruminate on, because this game is remembered very fondly now. And when it came out, there was a lot of people that really liked it, and it got some good reviews in some places, but it also got some valid criticism, which I'm going to be going into, about the gameplay. A lot of people now don't seem to remember just how much they banged on its gameplay at the time. And I want this video, I want this walkthrough to kind of stand as an argument, a counter-argument to this critique that this game has boring gameplay, and that the mechanics are not deep, like that they're just very basic and simple and they never develop. I don't necessarily think that they're the most complex, nor the deepest, and there could be several things you could add to it, but I still think that they have enough going on to make them kind of... There's something to be said about breadth and depth. Some people want breadth, and they say depth, and they don't realise that they're confusing those two definitions. You don't need a million tools to make something deep. You need something that is functionally rewarding and interesting, and that will provide the depth just by how it interacts with all the other systems. And speaking of other systems, we now have a flanker and a chainsaw guy having a go at us. This guy has a gold shroud, so the darkness enveloping him is gold. It is the strongest, most powerful shield that the Taken can have, and it has one feature that makes these the hardest thing on this challenge run, bar none. And that is the fact that if you are not shining and boosting your torch on it, they regenerate their shield. These enemies, guys, are the biggest pain in the ass when you're doing no batteries. It's not fun. And a lot of the times, I'm going to recommend running. I'm going to recommend getting out of there. Unless you want to use flares, unless there's some kind of light source that you can use, or unless you've got something figured out. I'd love to kill those guys every time I bump into them, but I have to really apply myself, and sometimes you simply don't have the tools or the mechanisms. Because that gold shroud was never balanced around the idea of what I'm doing. Does that mean it can't be done? Absolutely not. You can totally do it. I'm just choosing not to. But here we go with a little bit of Carmageddon. The car sequences in this game are actually kind of sick. And if you don't know, Remedy did build a big open world. They built the entirety of Bright Falls with the intentions of using it in a sandbox fashion, but it ended up being a little bit too ambitious and a bit too elaborate, and they still wanted to use a lot of the work that they'd made, and that's one of the reasons why we get these awesome traversal moments between the sections of the areas. And I think that the driving feels a little bit slippy, but all considered, this stuff looks great, and it's a nice pacing differential between what you're doing. And there is some combat too. You can use the headlamps to be boosted to do extra shroud damage to the Taken, and then you can kill them with the car. And I'm going to recommend highly, guys, that if you get into a situation where you can use the car to kill Taken, you totally should. I 100% would do it, and will be doing it in this run. It just makes sense, doesn't it? But we're going to be going back here to rescue Barry, and we're going to be coming up on the first encounter with the birds, with the flock. The birds are very interesting in this game. There is the telegraph right there. That noise that creature just made tells you that you're moving into one of these sequences. And it's been 10 years since I've played Alan Wake, so I don't remember what the flare gun's like against the birds, or what all the crazy strats are when you're using all the goods. I would imagine you can get rid of them quite effortlessly. On this run, the birds are a pain in the dick. I do have some good strategies for them, though, to make sure that they're not too bad. And a strategy here, move forward, spawn the Taken, come back to the car, and then use your lights to take the shields, and then to take them out. And that guy is so beefy, he takes a hit from the car. That usually one hit kills the standard Taken, but he's one of the assaults. Your car can take too much damage, and it will knock Alan out of it. but it is not damage on you. And if it is damage on you, and I didn't notice, then this is a failed run, lol. Shout out to Centre Strain. But I believe that the car is its own entity, and when it takes enough damage, it forces you out of the car. And that leads you to all kinds of shenanigans with the car. For instance, if you are in a situation where you're about to get hit, maybe climbing in the car is a good idea, you know? You can use car strats and get really creative, but the movement on this thing's not the best. The one time where doing creative car strats might backfire on you is when you're fighting against the Dozer / the Combine Harvester. I forget which one it is, I think it's the Dozer. You take on a Dozer in a junkyard, and if he's running towards you and killing the car, when Alan climbs out of the car, he teleports onto the front of it, and then it's just mandatory damage, so you'll have to restart. But you can get creative with that car in that fight and actually beat the boss with it. Anyhow, swiftly moving on. Pick up the flares, proceed. One adage to live by in this game, guys, is if you see any of the Zane caches with the phosphorescent light when you shine the light on it, always follow them, always pick them up. They'll give you all kinds of good stuff, which will make the game a lot more fun and a lot more fair. So if you're struggling, look out for those caches and use what they provide. I will be finding those, but I will not be showing it, guys, because as you've noticed, you're 30 minutes deep. This is nearly a 3-hour-long video. I'm not going to be showing you every single minutiae, every single detail. I'm just going to assume that you're intelligent enough to seek it out yourself. And then here we have the Flock boss fight. Which, it should be called Flocks, shouldn't it really? Because I think it's multiple. I could be wrong, though. All I know is that if you stay outside and you do this encounter out in the open, in the garden, it gets into a situation where it's very easy to get overwhelmed. And one of the biggest problems with the birds in this game is that every so often they will charge you without doing the audio telegraph, and a lot of the times, even if you react to it, even if you shine the torch and boost it, they will still get you. So it will be a failed attempt. But I have this spot here, and this spot here is really strange. The birds can't get to you really, and they all try to come down through this awning, and you can shine the torch upwards and get some free damage at point blank range, and then they'll fly away, and then you can hit them with the normal torch and do a little bit more damage. If they'd given them the golden shroud, this fight would be an absolute pain in the ass, and I don't even know if I would have been able to do it. But they didn't. They had the foresight to know that, and I really do appreciate that. But this section takes a while, guys. It's not the coolest strategy, but it's definitely effective, and it's safe, which is what's important. And speaking of safe, we can talk about our favourite basic bitch, Darkside Phil. So, if you watched his Alan Wake playthrough back in the day, you'll remember that he really didn't like the combat. He really banged on it. He complained the whole time, liked the story, hated the gameplay. Thought it was boring, thought it was repetitive. Cried the whole time. I definitely recommend watching it. It's hilarious. Then when he played the remastered version, it was like he'd had a stroke and he was a completely new man. And before the game was coming out, he was talking about how much he thought it was a great game and, you know, how nostalgic he was for it and all these other things. And does it ever bug you guys when you get those people that... These people are the fans of every single game ever conceived, yet you've never heard them talk about it and you've never heard them mention how they've invested any time in it or if they've played it or anything like that. Everybody's a massive fan of insert every single video game, and the one side of me thinks, like, maybe it's just the YouTuber gambit, maybe it's the influencer dog shit, you know? You say you love everything so that all the people come to your channel and they love it too and they share that emotional bond of everybody liking the same thing together, and it's probably a good way of building engagement and money and whatnot. But with Darkside Phil, I don't think that's what it is, you know? Phil is, unfortunately, himself all the time. And he's not capable of being that professional or that savvy when it comes to getting an audience his way. Because he prides himself, doesn't he, on essentially being this unchanging, immovable fluke. And I just think that that's hilarious, because I've not seen his remastered run of Alan Wake. I'm looking forward to checking it out when I do some editing or something. Because I do think that this is one of those games where... I haven't played this, as I mentioned, since I played it on the 360. And I'm a huge Remedy fan. I just did it, guys, didn't I? Influencer dog shit. There you are, guys. Massive fan of Remedy. They're my favourite Swedish developer. You know, let's say a bunch of things that don't matter. My favourite game by them has to be Devil May Cry. You know, all the classics. But jokes aside, I came from Max Payne. And Max Payne, to me, is one of the greatest games ever made. It's a very special game for me. I will always love Remedy. Remedy are they're those guys that get complete immunity from criticism from me personally. Just purely based off the fact that everything they've ever done hit perfectly at the right time in my life, and I always enjoyed it. So coming off Max Payne 1 and 2, when they were doing Alan Wake, I couldn't have been more excited. And then it came out, and I had a really, really good time with it. I don't think it's as good as Max Payne. I just don't. I prefer Max Payne. However, I think what it offers is really, really unique. And I've come back to it now, all these years later, and I feel the exact same. I feel like everything I remember about the gameplay is just as good and as fun, and as essentially what it is, as it was when I first played it. It's not like coming back here I've really grown to appreciate it, or I've really grown to see it as it truly is. None of that's happened. All the flaws of this game that I think it has, all the flaws of the combat, still present. All the pros, still present. If anything, it looks a little better now because we haven't had such a focused and such a polished single-player campaign of this quality or of this length in a long time. Because games are all multiplayer-obsessed Battle Royale. I forgot how long this took. Jesus Christ. This really took... That's it, though, guys. That was it. And then we move on now to Episode 3. And the first encounter here is a ton of assaults, which I'm going to flashbang and then proceed onwards because I don't have a gun. And they're going to chase me from behind, so we're going to dodge that dude. Stick another flashbang down and continue moving on. I love that black and white going on just there. That looks so cool after the flashbang. What a beautiful game visually. I still think the atmosphere of Bright Falls, when you're moving through these forests, when there's all the fog and there's all the crazy distortion on the lens, I still think this game, it nails an aesthetic that you simply don't see. The engine, the art, everything about it just really screams what it was trying to be. This crazy, psychological Twin Peaks, noir thing going on. Like, everything about it is just... I can't get over how well they nailed the aesthetic when they did. And you can tell that years went into it. And it makes me really excited that they've finally been able to do Alan Wake 2. They made a prototype for that game really soon after they'd released this because they wanted to start working immediately. And unfortunately, they just couldn't get it to move forward. And a lot of the stuff that was in that ended up making it into, American Nightmare, that kind of standalone story thing. But now, 10 years later, we finally get Alan Wake 2, and it's going to be coming out, I think they said, in 2023. And it's interesting because they're changing genre, they're going a lot more survival horror, they're going a lot darker, and it's going to have an 18+ rating too, which means it has the potential for it to be a lot shockier and a lot more violent. I'll be interested to see how they do that. Just there, guys, I popped the flare so I could hit the generator just in case anybody fucked with me. You'd be surprised the amount of times you get fucked with on those generators, and I don't even see the point in why risk it, right? I'm going to be quite lenient on flares and flashbangs. I oftentimes have a full stack of them, so you should use them when you want to use them and knock yourself out. But here is a sequence of just running past the tick and continuing our path and getting out of here, getting to where we can get to survive. You may have also noticed that there are these lights you can press, and the beam on these lights is really powerful. It generally takes the shroud very quickly, and you can use them to do the hard lifting for you. And it really makes me wish that the game had littered them in more areas, or perhaps given you ways to unlock them or find them or do some kind of interaction to get that type of stuff working. Because one of the weaker areas of Alan Wake's gameplay loop, in my opinion, is that outside of the torch in a lot of sequences, there's almost nothing you can do to deshroud the enemies in a more expedient fashion, or even in a more skillful fashion, outside of using resources. And there's a lot of stuff you can say to that point, which could make it more interesting. A couple of ways they could have gone with, but they went for this standardized mechanic of it takes a certain amount of time to get rid of their protection, and then it takes a certain amount of time to kill them. And usually in games, depending on balance, you would have had one be quite long and then the other one quite quick, or vice versa. And I'm really interested why they didn't do anything like that with the game. They kind of went with this very specific mechanism, and then it's just inflated on the harder difficulty so it's more noticeable for us. But it would have been interesting if it was hard to take the shrouds, but the enemies died very quickly. Or the shroud went down quickly, but the enemy was very beefy. And I do think you could experiment with that in several ways and come up with some cool stuff, but unfortunately I can't speak about that now because this is one of the worst parts of the game. So you probably weren't expecting the bridge sequences to stand out to you on a run like this. I'm assuming your first thoughts went to the stage battle with the, Children of the Elder Gods song playing, or a couple of other sequences that can be quite difficult, like protecting the helicopter when you're being attacked. No, those bits are easy, those bits are fun, absolutely balanced. This is garbage. This is one of the worst checkpoints and worst sequences in this challenge run. And the best way to do it, you want to dump flashbang over there, you want to immediately run straight forward here, and then there's going to be a barrel that attacks you, and I think it's a fridge. You want to make sure you get rid of the first one. No, it's a wheelbarrow. Get rid of that one and try to dodge that other one. That looked like nothing. That looked like 30 seconds. It wasn't memorable. It was effortless. I'm telling you now, guys, I died there like 30 times. 30 times to get that strat to work. And even when I knew what I was doing, the physics in this game can turn into moments where random furniture will hit you and it will hurt you. I shit you not, I did a fight on this game where I was taking down a ton of enemies, and then there was a teleflanker that pushed a barrel as he moved. The barrel rolled into me, moving at about half a mile per hour, and it hurt me. So do not mess with the physics, do not mess with the geometry, do not mess with the furniture. This stuff, like things like that, see those barrels getting flung around? It's wonderful on the physics, it looks great, it makes this game really feel ahead of its time. But that shit touches you, it hurts. And no damaging this game is more difficult in the areas that I'm trimming out than it was in the areas that you're getting to see. Because there are moments where you touch an objective and it hurts you. How the hell do you go through an objective that hurts you on a no damage run? It's absurd, right? And some of the stuff I came up with to get around it was ridiculous. Super exploitations and all kinds of madness. And things like this, what you just saw then, you've not seen too much of this because of the edits. But you can skip almost every fight in this game, it seems like. You can skip this one too. If you go over to the doorway, you can immediately touch the button and just time this out and then run forward as soon as you can, but that's not really what this is about, so you're not going to see me do it too much. First thing I do here is I bait the enemies together and dump the flashbang, and then do you see that? I don't think this is working as intended. I think this might be high frame rate and physics. I threw that flashbang, and for some reason that cylinder rolled and it flipped the dozer. So now I've got complete freedom to kill this guy without worrying. And if you're playing this game and you're struggling here, you can use a few flashbangs on the dozer and a couple of flares and you can take it down really quickly. It's not a big issue. But when this happened, it was so strange. I didn't know if anybody knew about this or if anyone had seen it. And because there's more than one dozer fight in the game, I'm going to fight the other one properly. But I left this one in spite of recording it again and getting a cleaner fight. Because I just thought that this was ridiculous. And due to this being technically a boss fight, this dozer has a golden shroud, which means I'm going to have to really try to work this down. And the problem with these shrouds is unless you focus your beam, you can't do anything to it. So I'm going to do flare, focus beam, and then when it runs out I'm going to pop another flare potentially, and then I'm going to focus my beam again, and I'm just going to mix up the two things. And there's no real way around it. The no battery limitation means that these are the hardest sequences just through sheer pedantry and nothing else. And there are a natural taken that spawn here to keep this going, so keep your eyes on what you're doing, and most importantly, do not touch any possessed items like this. If you touch them, they do damage. But he's close to going down, and I would argue that might be the strangest dozer fight on YouTube right now, unless somebody else has managed to recreate that. Which I should probably talk about the PC port and give you an idea of what's going on, because I do think that that's quite fascinating and worth discussing, and this guide is moving really quick and jumping all over the place. So this is played on PC, it's the original version, guys, it's the PC port from 2010. It is not the remastered version. The remastered version was completely unplayable. I couldn't get it into a state that was anywhere close to what I wanted to put any time into. And the things that you have to do to this game are not too bad all considered. I was quite surprised. So the first thing I changed obviously was the FOV. You can change the FOV in the game. That's a really nice feature to have back in 2010, and it does make the game a lot more enjoyable. The game has skippable cutscenes by default, so you don't have to sit through any of that. Fuck you, hardline, which I was really happy about. The game is capped at 200 FPS, which is, not as good as I would have liked. It could have been better to hit my refresh rate, but if you uncap it and go higher than 200, your mouse input gets affected. And this game's frame rate affects mouse input. So when I uncapped it to test it, it was not good. It was nowhere near where it needed to be for me to be anywhere near as consistent or effective as I'm being in these videos. So I capped it at 200, I kept it there. But the most important thing, guys, if you're looking to play this and you're wanting to check it out because you're inspired, I know I would be if I was watching this, I recommend the motion blur disabler. So this game has incredibly aggressive motion blur. I had no idea just how bad it was. It turns out it's horrendous. I would go as far as to say that it was completely unplayable in that form. The joy being the PC community are industrious people, and they came up with a rather simple fix, which you can get through PC Game Wiki. And all you do is you download a file, you unzip it, and inside that file there is something that you replace inside your game files, and it removes it completely. And there are still moments where you get the blur and you get the effects, and you're always going to get those. It's just the way the game works. Some of them are quite nice, some of them are not too bad. But it gets rid of the criminal one that just makes it impossible to see for a player like myself. A couple of flankers here. Take these guys down. The flankers are one of the popcorn enemies in the game. They're very fast, they're very durable, but they go down super quick, which makes them really nice. And they go down in 1 bullet on normal, those guys, but on hard and on nightmare they go down in 2. And speaking of damage numbers, the hunting rifle is probably the most powerful gun in the game outside of the flare gun. And looking at the damage thresholds on here, you can really see just how much stronger it is than both of the shotguns. Because the pump shotgun, on some enemies, seems weaker than the standard shotgun, which is an interesting balance, but the hunting rifle is always superior. The hunting rifle can kill the chainsaw assaults in 3 shots, which is pretty insane considering it takes 13 pistol rounds. 5 shotgun rounds and 7 pump shotgun rounds, so huge difference there if you can get your hands on a hunting rifle, but in such a run as this we just can't do that. You might wonder as well if you see any moments where I change weapon or I check my ammunition, you might notice that I do have flare guns, I do have hunting rifles and shotguns and things. I was picking them up just in case this run wasn't possible. I'd never done anything like this before, so I didn't know whether or not the game would afford me the luxury of doing it, and the game is in such a good form and balanced and designed so well that this run was pretty much everything I could have asked for it. Except for 2 or 3 checkpoints and a couple of capture issues and having to recapture three different sequences due to OBS errors. The run was pretty much a dream. And I think the game looks great, it ran great. I managed to get the mouse working properly once I capped the frame rate and once I turned off the mouse acceleration with the direct aiming setting in the menus. And I have to say, for a PC port of this age, I think they did a great job. I think they did a superb job, and it has to be said because the PC port quality in this era was nowhere near as decent as it is now, and it still needs to get better, there's no 2 words about it, but it was definitely spot on Remedy. I can't say enough kind words all considered. But we're in the Land Rover now, taking out some Taken with our full beam and then cruising in and doing a bit of the old Carmageddon. These sequences are quite cool. Usually I would have done these on foot, but the amount of enemies they want you to fight with the limit on your pistol rounds, you'd have to use more resources, so why not use the vehicle, right? Some vehicular destruction. And then we can get out, we can hit the light, get that checkpoint, and then backtrack across the courtyard there towards the coal mine museum. And there's a flare gun over here just in case, which you could totally have got some good use out of, but alas, it is a limitation we can't quite circumnavigate. This also triggers another spawn as well. And there's a couple of environmental hazards that you can use to your advantage which will help you out. Namely the swinging cables with electricity on them. If you ever see any kind of cable swinging around with a spark on the end of it, pretty much one hit kills any Taken that touches it. And you can get real creative with those and use them. Same with the barrels. These explosive barrels are ludicrously strong. They are your best friend. But I'm just going to wait for the big guy to hit the car, get out of the car, and then get over here and see you later, fellas. It is a good fight, that one, but there's a lot going on, and we're moving forward. And this fight coming up is actually pretty hard as well. There's a couple of teleflankers in here that just turn up, and then there's this big guy on the door. So pick up the ammunition and the batteries, and when you go towards the door it's going to spawn this dude. The problem with this fight is taking his shield in an expedient fashion, but if you throw a flashbang, the fight's over, and I did that fight a few times to try and get something really interesting, and it just was too long. Far too long. The general idea is to stun the guy who chases you the whole time and then take out the two dudes with him. And I ended up using a flare, and I wasn't too fond of that, so just get in there, hit them with the big boy, and jobs are good. But this is a stack of flankers here getting in, doing their best Peaky Blinders impression, but use the explosives, funnel them together to get the multiple hit when it comes to shining and boosting your torch, and then just take them down. I do like the tracksuit boys with the trainers, it makes me laugh, and they turn up quite a lot too. As we push forward into a oscillating darkness moment, and look at all those dudes chasing me, lots and lots of guys. One of my criticisms of the turning on the interact action in this game is because it is so physics based and Alan kind of does his own thing. There are times when you tell him to do things and he has to move into position and it doesn't quite trigger as quickly or as expediently as it could, and it can lead to you getting your ass beat when you're trying to pick things up or turn things on, and it's moments like that where the movement really feels dated, and it is unfortunate. And luckily Remedy have completely streamlined that stuff out in future releases and it got a lot better, but in this game it's those weird animations that can get you into some serious trouble. And it's the same with his movement. This is another teleflanker as well. I think this is the first instance of two teleflankers at the same time, or even maybe multiple. This is really, really interesting, this graveyard, because it's a big fight with a lot of dangerous dudes, but one of the things you notice about this enemy is it's not that dangerous. And the idea, you know, incredible mobility, very dangerous, and this big shield to help it, is on paper it is intimidating, but you realise they're so tweaked and they're so crazy that they spend more time running away. And all this is, I'm not even going to boost my torch until he comes for me, and then I'll stun him with a boost, and then it'll be fine. And if he gets too close I can flare, or I can dodge. Either way I'm probably going to be okay. And one of the good things about this that I really do like, and I talk about this a lot on guides, this guy's teaching you how to track an enemy that's moving fast. And obviously it's not easy to do, it's a pain in the ass at first, but just the movement this guy's doing is more demanding than anything else in the game. And if you can follow this guy and you can get good at following him, everyone else is going to be moving in slow motion. And this is the kind of difficulty demand and skill check that I wish games did more of. And when you think about it, Alan Wake does these skill checks in many ways. It does have an enemy with great mobility. It does have verticality and something attacking you from above, so you have to track up instead of just across the horizontal axis. It has all these moments of demanding that you do things, and these moments here, I don't really know how to discuss the possessed items without calling them shit. Because I think they're too beefy. And obviously this is Nightmare, it's meant to be difficult. It takes 10 seconds to get the shield off them, potentially more. And it's really difficult to dodge the stuff that fire at you, because even if you press dodge, sometimes they still hit you because they're so good at doing that. Like, I think the idea of it and the way they split up the gameplay is really, really nice on a pacing and on a smoke and mirrors side. But mechanically, I wish there was a way to guarantee that you could always beat the engagement here without it being just time. Because you'll see me, look at me dumping flares. I'm not dumping flares here, guys, because I want to burn the flares. I'm doing it because I know if I don't, I can potentially get touched, because this takes so long on these restrictions. And I think it'd be... One of the ways I think they should have done this, I think you could maybe have one or two that are really dense and really tricky to take down like this, potentially slower ones or ones that don't track so well. But I would like it if most of the possessed items, the shroud went down really quickly, but they moved really fast. So they shook a little bit, and then they zoomed towards you, and maybe they were a bit dodgeable. But if you got your torch on them, they die really quickly. And I think that would have been a nice way to mix this up. Because as it stands, every single time you come up against a possessed enemy, they're the hardest enemy in the game. Because you can't get their shield down quick enough. Every single one of them takes an ungodly amount. Like, look at this. I'm going to fight this vehicle part, this animated vehicle part, more intensively than I'm going to fight anything in this game. And I'm in no risk of dying or being injured here because of how fundamental the design is. Put something between you and it and you are fine, right? So the idea here is fine, it doesn't rear its ugly head, it doesn't come across as anything too intimidating, but when you get on that bridge at the end of the game, on the final chapter, and you have to take on the crane after a massive gauntlet of enemies like this, that sequence is awful. And it brings me to the idea of the weak point of the shroud itself. So I discussed earlier that you shine the torch on enemies as you're watching right now, and it diminishes their ability to protect themselves, and once their barrier's gone, you can kill them. Alan Wake 101. I would have really liked to have seen there be a little bit more to the torch mechanic. As it stands, you get different torches, and you get the ability to exploit light sources, which are very powerful, which is obviously very cool. You have the flares to augment your light, you have the flashbangs to augment your light as well, and then you have the boosting of your particular torch, which is very powerful too. Outside of environmentals and those consumables, you are limited to the power of the torch that you're using and to the batteries that it's consuming. And casually, this works absolutely fine. It establishes a fundamental that you have to adhere to, or you don't play very well. But don't you think there should have been a skillful application that separates a player like me from a player like, for instance, someone who's never touched the game before? Because I think they could have easily done that. And one of the things I would have liked to have seen is, you see how there's a circle here that's slowly receding, it's slowly concentrically shrinking as we shine? Can you imagine if it had an accent somewhere? Some kind of object inside that circle, and if you moved your torch towards that accent, it increased the speed in which the shroud faded. The equivalent of aiming at a vital spot instead of aiming at the foot or the toe. And they could have made it so that each enemy had a different vital spot that if you shine the torch on, you got increased shrinkage of the shroud. And I just think the idea of that could have been really fascinating, because I'd love to be able to take a shield quicker by having good aim. And one of the things that I value the most at this moment in time in video games is my ability to aim. I'm constantly grinding, I'm constantly checking new things, trying new settings. I'm always on the look to improve, because that's what's enjoyable to me now that video games are in a bit of a slump. My enjoyment comes from self-improvement, because there's nothing that interesting at the moment. So having a feature like this, a skill ceiling on your ability to stun and impede on the enemy and assail them, would have been fantastic. And they could have even had it so that the weak points were different on different difficulties, or the weak point moved maybe, and depending on the difficulty depended on how sporadically and quickly and erratically that weak point did move. And I'm not saying that every enemy should have had it, but it would have been really, really cool. That could have been even a secret feature. Hell, maybe the game has a secret feature like that I never found, and it's just me being ignorant, and the game had these wonderful systems to begin with. But playing this game now, coming back to it, I just kind of felt that I was always at the mercy of, it will take this amount of time to derobe this villain, and then afterwards I could kill them really quickly, because when it comes to just shooting, I'm okay. And I'm hoping Alan Wake is going to go a little deeper and a little further with the idea of that. It'd be really nice to see that developed. Like this here, the birds, I've not discussed this and I should. If you take your view away from the birds, they'll attack you. I was lucky I didn't get damaged just then. Sometimes they spawn on you like that and you're fucked. But if you don't look at them, they come towards you. So if you want them to be closer to you so you can do more damage with the torch, just take the torch off them for a little while and they'll come towards you, and as they get closer, they'll call out telling you that they're going to dive bomb, and then you can shine on them and you can do a lot of damage. And it's funny, isn't it? A moment like this, the reason that I'm being tentative here is the birds are easily the #1 enemy for ambushing you and dealing damage. The amount of times they spawn really close and immediately dive bomb and there's almost nothing you can do, it happens 3 or 4 times in this game, and if you don't know those spots, you can't even flare and save yourself, because they'll hit you through the flare. And these are the parts that make no damage difficult. Like right now, if you could turn during that cinematic angle, and just turn the camera up so that when it recovered you'd be fine, that wouldn't be a problem, and that would have been effortless. But there's a moment of doubt there, can I get on target in time? And sometimes, if the birds are too close when you get on target and you boost on them, they'll just fly through you and they'll hurt you. And it's kind of funny, isn't it, that this game is... If you were to ask me before I'd come back to it, if you'd have said, Chris, is Alan Wake hard? I would have gone, no. Because I bossed it on console a long time ago, did it on Nightmare, loved the game, destroyed it, had a good time. The game gives you lots of resources. Objectively, it's not the most demanding game. That being said, it can be difficult, you know. Like anything else, games are subjective, everyone's different. But if you were to ask me that, I would have just said no. This fight's really hard, by the way, and the checkpoint's god-awful too, so I'm going to use a flashbang here. If the checkpoint had been in this room, guys, I would have done this fight with no items but the gun. But you have to run all the way back down from inside the cave, all the way back up here, and you have to watch this every time, and I got really, really pissed off doing it. So instead, flashbang, dodge the projectile, and then it's just a 1v1 against this big dude, this assault, who has the sledgehammer. And all we're going to do, slowly space him, weaken his shield, and if you can, try to boost him to stun him, but this guy's really good at dodging it, he doesn't give a shit. And eventually, it'll break, and then you can mag dump the shots needed, which I think we established was 8 bullets, right? Because there's a few of these guys, and I don't really understand. It says there's Assault Chainsaw and Assault Normal, so I'm maybe thinking that the guy with the shovel and the guy with the hammer are the same dude. And then the chainsaw guy is exclusive. I was really hoping they'd have different names. And maybe they do. Maybe this wiki is just full of fan bullshit. But it would have been nice for them to have unique names. But this is another sequence with birds. And we're going to be using a lot of flares here. They give you a flare gun too. I miss the flare gun so much. And it's not even because you need it. Doing this run really taught me that you don't need the flare gun at all. You know, the game is... Alan Wake is so capable when it comes to his damage output. It's his torch that lets him down. And that's where the flare gun comes in, because it's both a torch and damage. But it looks so good. I think that's one of the things I love the most about this game, how good the flares look. It's just a beautiful effect in it. It makes something beautiful, something pivotal to gameplay, and it's the ultimate union of both art and mechanic, and I love that. This is hard as well, this. Because they can fly through the bottom of this fucking cage and come through and hit you, and it's kind of awkward for you to look down and shine the torch at them. I really recommend using flares here. These are all the difficult moments, but in the previous tangent I was saying, you know, if you were to ask me about Alan Wake, if it was a hard game, I would say no. I think the game is very balanced, and I think the challenge is quite nominal because of that. All the hard parts on no damage come from stuff like that. Did you see that? That telegraph was when that bird was about to hit me. If I'd have not flared just then, I was hit. And I can definitely adhere to the argument of games aren't designed around no damage. It seems a bit ridiculous to expect them to be. And I agree. I completely agree, guys. Concurrently, though, I do like the idea of every single engagement in a video game being able to be done in the most basic, primitive manner, if you are good enough, because that means that you have established a mechanical hierarchy that enables skilled players to overcome any situation with any build or any circumstance, and that is true game design to me. That is true mastery of those systems that you've made. And this game, all of the most difficult parts of it, under no damage stipulations, stem from the sequences that are not designed, are not really combat engagements. They're always kind of the silly bits, the bits you don't expect, the bits you don't think about. There's one sequence later on where you have to touch a fuse box, and the fuse box hurts you when you touch it, but you've got to touch it to trigger the next part of the game. Stuff like that. How are you supposed to do that? You know, that's the oddity. Or this part here, guys, when you go onto the bridge, if you turn around before you trigger that cutscene, you can actually put your torch on the opposite side of this bridge and immediately start hitting this chainsaw guy, this hammer bro. And then if you use the flare, you can back him up. If you use a second flare, you can push him towards this cliff, and then when you break his shield, when you shoot him, he'll fall off the edge, and you'll save yourself some bullets. And I've not really done that too much, but I thought that was kind of cool, so I kept that one in the guide. And then there's just a handful of the standard takens here with the range capabilities. The reason you go for the big guy first instead of the other way is those dudes, they just throw things. They throw so much shit at you and you have nowhere really to go to dodge it correctly, and unless you trigger that cinematic camera when you dodge and you get those iframes, you tend to just dodge into the side and get hit anyway. But this is a funnel, so even without batteries, you're going to be able to stun these guys and do what you need to do to them. And then it's just a case of putting them down. And those guys should take 4 bullets, in and around 4 bullets. And then we have this, which, this sequence can be completely skipped. I'm going to show you a strategy where you can get out of the middle of it quite quickly, and then you can take them on at your leisure. That right there, guys, is a cinematic flare that happens when you do it in a particularly crowded moment. It was the same in Max Payne 2. If you reloaded in Max Payne 2 during bullet time, the camera did that, and it's one of those things that Remedy put into this game. If you have no interest in this fight, just go the other side of this area and drop down, and then continue on, and it's the end of this episode. But I wanted to fight these people, and that's what you're seeing here. And again, all the stuff you've got, look at that, 14 flares, 6 flashbangs. I think they're going to take these off you. So if you want to use them, feel free to use them. You don't really need them. And then that's the end of that encounter. That encounter, if you try and do it in the room, is really, really difficult. And it's hard because of those big shields. If there was a better way to get those big shields off you without just focusing them with flares, it would be okay. But kiting all those threats, all that damage and all that capacity for people to throw shit at you, it's super difficult to do. And then we have one of the dirtier parts of the game, which is a mandatory damage that you can actually skip. So it's not mandatory at all, but it seemed like it for a while. So right here, you need to come back and get the second flare. If you wait for the flare to burn out and you turn the camera and you look back, it'll populate it on the geometry. There it is. I don't know why they didn't just give you 2, because you can't do that door with 1. Maybe on easy you can, I don't know. Anyhow, be careful once you flare this door. You need to hug the right-hand wall and walk really slowly coming up. Because if you don't, the light blowing out is going to hurt you. And I just don't get this. This does damage, this. If you go through this door, that was it there. That light will hurt you. That right there is the most annoying no damage moment so far. And then the ball here, it's just a case of getting it to take the bait, fly after you and bust the door. And it's really easy to mess this up because of the inconsistent dodge. And I don't know about you guys, how do you feel about that? I feel like the dodge works about 70% of the times when I want it to, and most of the times when I don't, I still do a dodge, but I just get tracked perfectly and hit anyway. I would rather have a dodge that had a bigger cooldown or was more limited, but worked every time I tried to do it, than one that you can spam like this one, but you don't necessarily know whether or not it's going to work consistently. I don't know how you folks feel. I really feel vulnerable when I have to do the dodge in this game because I don't trust it at all. I would much rather boost the light and stun people with the torch because the torch stun is consistent. It feels a lot more consistent. This is a pain in the ass as well. This is another sequence with possessed items, and the funny part here is the possessed items are your cover, and all of them I think have got this gold aura, which means you have to stay on it or you're not going to do too well. That one doesn't have a gold aura anymore, which is interesting. Maybe this is a slower regenerating one. But do you notice the piece of cover I'm hiding behind? Yeah, it turns into an object. So you've got to be very careful. And this is where the physics engine just rolls dices. If you get unlucky in a moment such as this, it will hit you perfectly, it'll bobble, it'll knock, it'll do all kinds of crazy stuff and it'll end up damaging you. But hopefully, you'll be able to just get some lucky bounces. Later on that bridge with the crane, I was right at the end of that sequence. I was getting super frustrated as well. There was a fridge that kept hitting me. And I went and I hid behind a car. And the fridge was on the other side of the car, and it hit this big wagon thing. And the wagon teetered towards me, and the physics on it as it teetered didn't tip over, it just kind of leant a little bit as it hit it. You know, cause and effect. That leaning hurt me when the van touched me. And it taught me an important lesson, which is don't mess around with any of these sequences. These parts right here are the most boring ones to watch because all I'm doing is using a torch that won't work because I'm intentionally gimping it. And this is legitimately hard. Because I can't kill it and it's regenerating quicker than I can kill it. And it's funny, isn't it? You watch it back, you just think, well, this looks dumb. It is. But these are the moments that you might struggle with the most if you do this run. And it just stems from the battery mechanic is such a central tenet to how the game works. No one expected players to do this. Except for maybe DSP. But that's just because he didn't realise, and nobody told him. He did nothing wrong, he did absolutely everything correct. But it did make me postulate on how they could have done this differently. I do like the idea of the gold shroud. I think that could be good. I think it could have done with some tweaking, but I think it definitely was an interesting idea. And I wonder what they'll do in Alan Wake 2 with it, if that's going to be retained. But look at this. Oh my gosh, it's really frustrating. There's that one. And I think there's that one just directly in front there. That guy. And once we've killed him, Barry's going to tell us to escape. But how do you feel about a sequence such as this, guy? Something that is innocuous and you wouldn't even notice it playing normally, but then you do a challenge run and you realise you've bitten off more than you can chew. Because there's a boss fight coming up that I have to skip. And I hate that. I really do. I could have gone back and flared and whatnot and wasted resources, but at the time I didn't know if I could do the exit. So I couldn't really constitute, you know, taking that kind of a risk. And I was really pissed about it because I wanted to kill him, but they made it so difficult. They spawned enemies with him, they spawned birds with him, and he has a gold shield that I couldn't for the life of me take down. And it leads me to the idea of the torches. So, in Alan Wake you get, I think it's 3 torches. You get the starting torch that I'm using now, you get the higher power torch, and then you get the big boy, don't you? The big square boxed torch, the industrial one. So you get the small, you get the medium, and you get the large. And it's not one of those games where when you get one upgrade you retain it and that's your upgrade from then on. It's a game where they're constantly swapping and ducking and weaving on which torch you're actually using. And I don't like that. I don't like getting the good torch and then falling down a cliffside and having nothing and then having to pick up a shitty torch again. That to me really hurts that sense of progression and that sense of empowerment. But what you need to bear in mind is the game was designed with this in mind. This sequence coming up is quite hard as well. This garden maze is kind of annoying. I would have really liked to keep the torches or have the ability to find the torches early, and if you're good enough and you don't die, you keep them. Like, I think it could have been cool if you die, your torch levels down, and then you had to collect a certain amount of batteries or something to get a new one. They could have turned it into something really arcadey and something video gamey, and I wouldn't have minded too much. But as it stands, coming back to the crap torch when you've had the better one is a wounding experience, and on this run, it's even more so. The spawn coming up here is deceptive. Do not chase that guy at the start. If you do, it spawns a flanker from behind. And I'm going to show you now that he wasn't there, because if you come over here on the left, you can check down this part of the garden maze and nothing is here. But as soon as you cross that threshold going that way, he populates at the back of this and you'll get pinched. So right there, boom, see him? Flanker turns up. They do this a few times in some certain areas. It's usually not too bad. But on this particular sequence, we don't have that many resources, and there's a particularly difficult section coming up. I love the mechanic with Zane and the hidden messages that show when you torch them. I think that's such a cool part of really committing to the game's fiction and to its mechanics. Some of the stuff in this game really reminded me of why I love video games and why I love Remedy so much. And I do think Quantum Break was a weaker Remedy game, and I do think Control was better, but I still think it was weak in some areas I would have preferred. They really haven't made anything quite like Max Payne or Alan Wake for me. And they keep doing experimental stuff and they keep changing, and I love that. I love the risk of that, instead of just resting on their laurels. But I would be lying if I didn't say I would really like to see a return to some of these peaks of quality, and hopefully that's what Alan Wake 2 will be. But here we go with a hammer. We've got an assault hammer coming, and this guy is really beefy. I'm going to have to dodge him here, and it's becoming really aware that this could be make or break. So I go for it early, he doesn't swing, and then I catch the roll on the second swing. I got really lucky then. And then all we need to do is shoot this dude the appropriate amount of times to put him down. Another mechanic in this game, which I've not mentioned, which is really, really nice. If you tap the reload button, Alan will thumb in extra rounds quickly. So instead of doing a normal reload, he will do a faster reload, and it is a demand of the player in order to facilitate that, which I think is amazing. This was at the time where games were really thinking about reloading and thinking about how to make it engaging, and I don't know if you'd agree with this, guys, because you don't really notice it, do you, with the shotgun so much and with the hunting rifle, but reloading in this game is something I'm always thinking about, because I know that I have to engage with it, and if I do, I'm rewarded. And I think what they've done there is they've made reloading interesting. They've made it pivotal. Because if you're slowly reloading, you're going to get in trouble. You need those cylinders filled. You know, you need those rounds in that gun. And by tapping that button, you feel that connection, and it makes it feel important. And if you can make reloading feel important, you have done something that many games fail to do. And here is Emil. So if you run over here, it's going to spawn a bunch of guys to stop you running past him. It's also going to spawn some birds if you're not careful, but it's only an assault and a flanker. So flash them to stun them and go all the way over here to this light source. And what will happen is, when you hit the light sources, it despawns enemies. But if you run back towards the enemies, they come back. But here's the thing, right? They're invisible, they're not gone. You can hear them moving around, and they're actually still there. So I once went from an umbrella of light to go back and try and fight a fight I just skipped, and he smacked me when he was invisible. And it quickly stopped me from doing that. Because you'll never know the existential crisis I had running past fights in this. It's not my style, it's not usually what I do, but the no batteries and the handgun only, it forced me to be sometimes a bit industrious. And like, see the back now, see him? And now you've got the boss, you've got the flanker, you've got the flock. Look at this. This is a real bad situation. If I've got my normal stuff, if I can thumb some batteries in, probably deal with that, not too fussed. As it stands, yeah. This is a bad idea. But I kept this in to show you, I didn't run past him because I wanted to circumnavigate the game. I did so because in the end it just proved to be the smartest thing to do. But you might see some of the funny spawns here as I do this, because I was hoping I could isolate him and kill him and then move on, or at least kill the people around him and then move on. But it's random in how it generates them. And I got lucky here using all this ammo, I didn't need to. I'm still under the assumption that I'm going to kill him, I think. It's nice to see, isn't it, the more ambitious moments in your own gameplay. It'd be really cool if when you stepped in that, it replenished the torch. Because I could have used that to manipulate him. But every time he respawns, that shroud goes back to being full. And do you see how the other guy doesn't? The other guy retains the damage I've done to him. It would be so good if there was a way I could do this. Can you imagine if the game had a kind of counter window, sorry? When he goes to attack you, if you boost the torch, it does additional damage to the protection. That would have been a really nice idea. And I could have just done that. I could have just baited attacks and boosted him and took his shield down that way. Like, there were a lot of things they could have done. Can you imagine if there were certain things in the environment that you could interact with that could boost the ability for your light? If they'd have added certain reflective surfaces or certain cosmetics which could form a prism of some sort or a lens that magnified. I mean, you've got to be careful there because it could have got super gimmicky, couldn't it? It could have got really stupid. Look at it, look at him. Like, he's already got it fully back and my torch is dead. Like, there's just... What am I going to fucking do? Other than burning all my flares, there's just no hope here. This is where the challenge run really, really starts to show its fangs. Because I ain't breaking this shield, dude. Not like this. And if I could just use my torch on him normally and it just took a little bit longer, it would have been fine. But like, look at this. You can't do shit to this. And he can't get me. I'm completely safe. I'm in no trouble right now. This is not like it's difficult. I don't have the capabilities to do what the game wants me to do. Yeah. Rip Emil. We'll get him in the DLC. Don't you worry. Or maybe we won't, I don't know. I wonder if I should have removed this, because at this point it's kind of flogging a dead horse, isn't it? I am stubborn though, it just goes to show I really wanted to not do this. I really wanted to kill him and get rid, but I'm giving up. Yeah, I tried, guys. I'm sorry. And it's funny too, because this fight coming up, this is kind of tricky, this one. Not particularly this one. This is a weird spawn. Watch this flanker. He spawns right there. And there's two guys behind me right now, so I need to kill him quickly and hope they don't throw an axe. If any of these dudes had thrown anything, there's nothing you could have really done. unless you get really lucky with a dodge. Off-screen axes are the leading cause of restarts in these runs. Another thing worth mentioning too that I haven't had a chance to talk about, never shoot at a Taken behind a Taken that has the darkness on them. If he still has the shield, it almost vacuums the bullets into the guy with the big shield, and it'll just waste your rounds, so don't do it. And that's something too, you see me do this a lot, it's a bad habit that I've got. You do not have to boost the torch to aim and shoot. If you just press the trigger, Alan will hold the gun and shoot the gun normally where the torch is pointed at without you having to waste your batteries. And be really careful here, this wheelbarrow is an enemy. I did all that fight, absolutely beasted it, came down here, and I did not have enough boost on my torch to kill this flying possessed item. That's the kind of stuff that I mean, you know, and I'd say that the things you think will be hard won't be hard, and the shit that is the stupid stuff. That's exactly what I mean. Taking damage after that encounter to a wheelbarrow is not a good feeling. It's really disappointing, but if you play the game in such a manner, you're going to come up against hurdles. It's just the way of the world. For the people curious as well, it took me 10 hours to record this, and that was with skipping cutscenes. So it just goes to show how lengthy the game is. They gave you a really, really nice sized campaign, and I did not deviate from the straight path. I didn't check all the side parts you can go to. I didn't do any of the exploring. I kind of just stayed on the straight and narrow, and I still managed to get a good 10 hours out of it, which... What a fantastic campaign. And I wasn't ever bored as well. I really came through it appreciating what they'd done. This is hard, by the way. This is a difficult segment. So the first thing you want to do here is run directly forward, pop your flare, and try and get around this heavy guy. If you can get around this heavy dude, you can go all the way to the other side of this area, and Barry will pull aggro from all the other dudes. So you'll only have to contend with a couple of people. And what will happen is, because this is timed, you don't have to worry about fighting everything. You can fight the stuff that gets interested in you, and then when Barry opens the door, you can just run back and flare. And it's by far the safest and most consistent way to do this. Because I got really close standing at that gate and holding my ground, but eventually there's too many, and your dodge will fail. Like, look at that, I don't know how I dodged that. I didn't get the cinematic help or anything, I got lucky. But you can see them, look at poor Barry. There's a big dude, and I think there's a standard Taken and a flanker having a go at him. There's also two flocks above me, I don't know if they get involved, I'm not entirely certain. But there you go, he just opened the door. And when that happens, get as close as you can, pop the flare, drop the flare, and then sprint. This right here looks super cool, but it's fucking annoying. It's so annoying because you don't know if you're going to be able to face the right direction when you come out of it. But moving on to the next episode. Hey, 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 smoke weed every day. And we have an interesting sequence through the woods where we're going to be getting our torch back. We don't have a weapon or a torch in this sequence, but we do get attacked by some possessed minecarts. And there's a sequence coming up where you can get into a fight with no gun. And it's a fight that they want you to do, or they think that you'll do, because they give you a hunting rifle or a shotgun. And I can't use those weapons, so I don't end up doing it. But most of this is environmental, and it's just sheer traversal, which I think Alan Wake does really well. It's got a great sense of atmosphere, it looks phenomenal, and it takes you to some really, really nice places. Video games are so obsessed sometimes with ticking certain boxes that they forget that it's not just about ticking boxes, it's when you tick those boxes. And I think this game is a masterclass in mixing things up and gradually, slowly shifting from one exciting new gimmick to the next. And they do such a good job of it too. They could have really easily just given you the better torch and then expected you to do tons and tons of combat, but they're constantly taking the torch away from you and constantly putting you with allies that can help you, and it subverts how you're supposed to play. Like, look at this. Bear traps. I didn't even remember this game had bear traps, because they're barely a part of it, but they turn up for this one segment and it's just different. Remedy really, really know how to just add that little bit of seasoning every so often, and it makes you take notice. This is the area, by the way. If you go to the left towards, I think, where the cache is, you will trigger a fight there, and it's not good. This bit sucks. I hate this bit. So you're going to get a trigger coming up for the Taken to appear, and then you have to run through this forest. I have never seen more accurate enemies in video games. This is straight up Ninja Gaiden 2 incendiary shurikens. These guys hit me so many times with miracle axes. I put trees between them, I put logs between them, I zigged, I zagged, I jumped. The amount of times, and then when you get here, there's a spawn directly on you, which is really difficult to do the dodge on. So I popped the flare there because I didn't want to do that again. Like, if I knew that this video was going to get millions of views and I was going to make absolute bank on it, I would have grinded those sequences where I didn't use anything and I dodged everything and it looked like I was the best player in the world. But this might not even get 1,000 views, so fuck that. But here is the assault with the pickaxe. This guy is tanky as hell. This guy's a real beast. Fortunately, he has the same weakness, which is 8 rounds to the temple after you get rid of his protection. And then we transition into a driving sequence as we drive towards the farmhouse. And it's a really good idea here to kill these people with the car and the headlights, because if you don't, they'll come back on you and be arseholes about it. I've just quickly grabbed from the wiki a page that says the difference between the difficulties. And as we do some hit and run action here, sponsored by that Simpsons Crazy Taxi spin-off, or rip-off I should say, I'm going to go over them to convey what's going on. And it's kind of interesting reading this, because it says they changed the difficulty between the PC version and the console version, which I think is kind of odd. So they changed normal mode to easy for PC, which is kind of fascinating. So on normal mode, which is the traditional normal mode, the Taken take an average of 5 seconds to burn their shroud away. And then it says they take 2 to 5 revolver shots to kill, depending on, which ones you fight. And it says that was changed on the PC port to being easy mode. And then hard mode on console, which became normal mode on PC, it says that the Taken take an average of 8 seconds to take away their shroud, and an average of 3 to 6 revolver bullets to kill them. Oh, by the way, this is dirty as fuck, this. The spawns here are completely ridiculous on this crane. And you can run past this crane and it does not hurt you. I don't really know what's going on. Watch this. Look at that. Is that not the dirtiest spawn you've seen so far? He made no sound, guys. Absolutely no sound whatsoever, and he snuck up on me. And I am not an unalert gamer. I play with headphones cranked, I've got Sennheisers, I'm paying attention. And that dude, that guy ghosted me. That was really scary. Moving on though, Nightmare mode was unchanged between the modes. And it says that, of course, there are more manuscript pages that you can only find on Nightmare. That's one of the exclusive core components of this difficulty. And then it says that the darkness takes an average of 10 seconds to burn away, and it takes 4 to 8 shots to kill. Which we kind of already came up with from just simply playing. You see that, don't you? See, just then, looks like I should be hurt, right, but it didn't hurt me. And we can skip it and get on with our lives. So when you go in that barn and you pick up some stuff, when you come out it spawns a heavy pickaxe, and it spawns, I think it's a flanker, and then I get screwed here with Alan not climbing the fence. This is a really bad situation to be in, but now you've seen it happen to me, you don't have to have it happen to you. And he's just a normal Taken who throws his hammers, so this is not too bad. If you sync them both up, you can hit the shroud at the same time, which is really, really cool. And just be careful of his rushing move. That rush that he does, it's not dangerous and it's not intimidating, but the amount of times it's hit me when I've tried to dodge it is way too high. I wonder if that's in American Nightmare. I don't really remember that game too much. And I don't really remember why I didn't cover it on YouTube either, because I used cutscenes from it as an intro. Answers on a postcard if anybody remembers why I didn't cover that game, because I don't. It's one of the funny things, isn't it? And here we have it though, ladies and gentlemen. The bit you were all waiting for. Easily one of the coolest moments in the game. One of the coolest moments in this generation of games for me. So we've got some Poets of the Fall masquerading as the band from the game. And they're playing a song in the background, the Old Gods of Asgard. And the first spawn there, if you run forward and dump a flashbang, you can kill nearly everyone. then you can come back and get the heavy-duty lantern. And hopefully not get smacked by that guy who moves really quick when he wants to. So the stage battle, really intimidating. Lots and lots of enemies. Not really that many places to go. However, every time Barry puts the light on, it's a checkpoint. So this area is really, really generous when you think about it. And then if you look around, tons of flares, tons of flashbangs, so much ammunition. There's no reason to have a bad time here. It's a really fun segment. And part of me really wanted to do it on one checkpoint. I could have probably gone back in and manipulated it so I never went near the light. But by the end of it, I had fun regardless, you know. I thought this part was going to be really hard, actually. Because when I think about the moments of Alan Wake that are difficult, this is one of them I remember. But when I came back, the fireworks, the music, just, it's a ton of fun, isn't it? This is... It does make me wonder what this game would have been with more action like this. Because these set pieces... Oh, they're so good. I hope it doesn't get claimed on YouTube as well. That would be heartbreaking if I have to come in here and mute this. So guys, if you can't hear anything in the background, fuck you, YouTube. But here's another spotlight. That's another checkpoint. I don't think I used that checkpoint though. I think I managed to do the rest of it okay. Yeah, look how many people there are as well. Look how intimidating it is. It would be really cool if you could go out into the field and manipulate the fireworks yourself. Like bait everybody towards them and then shoot the fireworks and all that kind of stuff. That could have been really sick. I love the scarecrows as well. Can you imagine if the scarecrows came alive? Oh my god, that would have been so sick. Oh, here we go. Sneaky guy with a sickle behind us. Double sickle, man. There you go. See you later, friend. It's interesting though, isn't it, that the reviews critiqued the game's combat for being kind of one note and one tone, and I can definitely understand that from certain perspectives, and I've definitely mentioned some of my critiques of it. But it's good. Yeah, that's what I don't get, you know, it's like rock, paper, scissors. It's got that simplicity to it, but it's functioning to a level and a satisfaction. Even the audio, the feedback, it's really nice. There's another one. Boom. Get that checkpoint. Anybody else? Because it's strange, isn't it, that... Think about combat systems in games. Think about combat in something like Halo. Everybody praises Halo's combat. I don't really get it too much anymore because I've played it enough times now to understand that it's kind of the same thing. When it first came out, the AI was really clever. It was really, really different. It was really unique. And it had a couple of features in there that I thought were superb. Killing the hunters with a pistol with a well-placed weak point shot is perfection. Video game design 101. I don't know why they changed that, but they did. The noob combo, taking the shield with the energy weapon and then killing them with the bullet weapon. A beautiful, graceful piece of, essentially, a skill check. A skill check reward for being better at the game than the average player. This is the type of stuff that video games should all aspire to. This is the stuff I love. That was really cheeky, that spawn. You could have stunned him then with the pistol, but I went for the miracle dodge and I got it. One of the things I love about this game when you take damage, guys, is it reddens the screen. It flickers and flashes the screen red. You can completely tell when you're hurt in this game. And then on top of that, you have a life bar if you have the HUD on, so you know twofold if you've been damaged. That's the type of stuff that I'm a big fan of. I love that kind of feedback where it gives you exactly what you need to understand what's going on. But Halo's combat it's kind of the same thing, isn't it? You have a combination of standard weapons and power weapons, and with conjunction of both of those things in combination, you overcome enemies of varying degrees of shield and mobility and armor. No one complains about that. No one complains about you using energy to hit shields, you using bullets to kill, you using explosives to kill heavier things. It's just Halo. So why were there so many criticisms of using the torch? And then using the flares when you're in a bad situation, or using a flashbang or a flare gun when you need big damage. Flashbangs and flares, they're your heavy weapons. You know, your torch is your energy weapon. And your gun is your ballistics to get rid of enemies once you've weakened them with your energy weapon. It's essentially fucking Halo. You know, it's Halo many years later, And of course, I think the AI in this game is not as good as Halo's. It's not as dynamic or as interesting, but it's not bad, as my capture dies or lags around, which is always fun to see. And it's that thing, isn't it, of you find these days that a game gets criticised for being exactly what it is. And I never minded what Alan Wake was. I never found Max Payne boring. I think they did enough with the environment and the sound and the story and the characters and the event triggers, so that it always felt like, even though all you do the whole game is use slow motion and shoot people with awesome guns, even though that is the central feedback loop, they keep it interesting with what they have you doing. And I think Alan Wake does perhaps even a better job of that with its environments, with its, every so often, its transitional moments, its driving sequences, its slight puzzles emphases, just the way that it builds and it develops, and you go from these areas to that areas, and what the demand on the player of what he's doing is always subtly shifting while still seeming familiar. And all of these things, they're not reinventing the wheel. They're just making that wheel as power steering as it can be to feel great and to give you that glide that you're looking for. And I do remember some of the critiques on that back in the day for this. And I remember it from some of the YouTubers as well. And I remember it probably even from myself, because I probably wanted things to be a bit different and develop a bit further. But coming back to it, having games really, really, blown up into this perception of always shifting, always adapting, always imitating and parroting the new trends, and if you don't have this, you're not a real game, and that, and then coming back to something that is unabashedly itself, I think it really works. And the best part is I think that adding to it wouldn't be that difficult, and I don't think it would be that shocking or hard for the players to adjust to. I don't think it would be a difficult adjustment at all. And that's where Alan Wake could be really, really special. Because my biggest fear for Alan Wake 2 is that they imitate the amnesia trend, the whole, the monster chasing you and you not being very capable, and you kind of just stare at it and hope you don't go insane angle. I don't want it to focus in on jump scares. I don't want it to focus in on hiding under beds and stuff. I want it to be Alan Wake. I want it to be exactly what you're watching right now, but with an extension on the survival horror and the psychology. Like, I would love it so that you have to manage your resources and they don't keep taking it off you and giving you shit you didn't have. I'd love it that you could play better and keep all of your stuff for the times when you really need it. Because can you imagine how much stuff I would have had in this game by the end if they'd let you do that? Like, it'd be really cool if it was what Remedy do best, making something truly unique that stands out, and not diluting it with multiplayer teams and cooperative and all these other things that aren't necessarily needed but would be really welcome if they were to embellish in that way. Because can you imagine a co-op Alan Wake? This is the next episode, by the way, guys. This is one of the most difficult episodes in the game. This starts off with a very, very long fight, and then shortly afterwards there is another increasingly difficult fight too. So this is where it really, really, really amps up. And the power box coming up is the same power box that when you touch it can hurt you. And the sad part about this is it's a dialogue prompt as well, which means that they wrote this into the story, because on the second one, Alan doesn't want to touch it, he lets the girl do it. So I don't even think there's a way around touching that without taking damage. I'm just on a postcard, guys. Have you ever seen anybody do that? Is there a way to like cheese that and not take damage? Because I knew I was going to be editing around it, because it's only the combat encounters, I didn't have to worry too much. But I tried it 5 times, and I couldn't angle the box enough to touch it without being hurt. So, just goes to show sometimes games mandate. Look at the fucking axes right now, dude. This is ridiculous. It's really interesting, this game, when they give you a person with you, they amp up the action tenfold. And I love that, but I think that this really opens up the game to the critique of the torch mechanic. I have the most powerful torch in the game right now, and I can't take these shields quick. I can't take anyone's shield quick. It still took a while to take their shields. Even on a challenge run, I still can't do anything remotely skillful or intriguing to get these guys to be vulnerable. Because when they're vulnerable, they're dead. Her shotgun's infinite. My aim's pretty good, you know. You put the two of us together and we're a firing squad. I'm intentionally going to let her kill a lot of people in this sequence because it's a lot of fun to do that. But there's nothing that she can do to help me get that shield off them, and there's nothing I can do to do that quicker than anyone else. And that's the true area that I'm hoping that they can improve. Because if you were to put down on a piece of paper now, guys, what you'd like to see in Alan Wake 2, what would it be? That was really lucky then. I don't know how that guy didn't hit me. This is a really, really long checkpoint too, guys. If you get hit here, I don't blame you for skipping everything. I'd just run to the end. There's almost no reason to do this, but I really like this chapter, and I really like levels that take place in cities and towns. I just think that the urban environments, the suburban environments are really cool. But get back, you bastards. Every time I pop that flare, it makes me think of The Thing. And how we need another awesome Thing game. Because the one on the PS2 was pretty legit, but I'd love to see somebody tackle that again. Can you imagine a Dead Space-esque Thing game? Oh my gosh, that'd be so good. Maybe that's what the Callisto Protocol will be. But in Alan Wake 2, there are so many things I'd like to see. I've mentioned some of them in this video. I'd love to see them embellish upon the torch mechanic and the light mechanic. I'd love to see them give us more light solutions, more light options. I don't really know too much about what they could do, but there's a couple that they hint upon in this game with Barry. Barry covers himself in Christmas lights, which I think is a cool idea. The idea of finding a light source that you can wrap on yourself. Because if you think about it, survival horror, what is survival horror about? It's about resource management. It's about constantly being on the verge of never having enough, right? Never having anywhere near enough to deal with what they demand on you. That's kind of the principles of those games. Now, can you imagine if when you put those light sources on your body, whatever they may be, some kind of headlamp or some kind of vest that's got lights on it, when you get attacked, those lights diminish, or they break, or they damage, and then eventually they fail. That's the type of stuff that writes itself, you know? That's Survival Horror 101. Think about the safety knife in Resident Evil. In Resident Evil, you carry a safety knife. If a zombie grabs you, you can stab him to save yourself from taking a bite, but you lose the knife. It's that risk-reward factor. And think about it in Alan Wake. If they grab you when you've got that light source on, it stuns them, breaks their shroud, but damages your lights. And then it's gone. It would be essentially the same mechanic as that, but in a different concept. And this is one of the hardest fights in the game. So welcome to a very long checkpoint and a really, really awkward spawn that cannot be manipulated. So, did you see how the camera zoomed out there at the start? I tried running down the side of this street before the trigger of that camera. When you do it, you get beaten up during the camera. I tried running the opposite side of the street to try and get some separation. You get beaten up while the camera's panning. Every single time they spawn a flanker on you and he beats you up. They wanted you to be here and exactly here. And I know why. It's because it's hard fighting your way through this little cul-de-sac here. And this is one of the only parts of the game where I've combined 2 runs. And because I like to be honest, guys, because this is not about me waving my EP-ness, I want you guys to know, this is a fun run. It's meant to be a walkthrough too, but it's not meant to be world's first, world record, I did everything on 1 attempt, I'm the best in the world, I never make mistakes, because it's not true. So I have 2 runs here, guys. I have one run where the start is sloppy, and then the chainsaw guy is good, and I have one where the start is really good, and the chainsaw guy is really sloppy. So I trimmed them in the middle, so I had two good fights, basically. And it was because of the flare mechanic. I have to run away from the guy because a flare fails me on the other one, and it ruined the footage completely. And speaking about ruined footage, it looked a little bit choppy then. I hope that that's my editing software and not the video. But the idea is thus. You fight the first few guys, you do everything you can to get rid of them, and then the chainsaw guy turns up with the golden shroud. Once you've isolated all the enemies and killed them and it's just you and him, you can use 2 flares in your torch, and you will get rid of his protection, and then you can kill him. And it's really not that difficult, but the problem is, if you get hit here, you go all the way back to the start. And this was one of the sequences that took me the longest, because I wasn't happy with the footage. And the worst part is, if this would have been a bad part on recording where OBS had failed, I'd have had to play this level back to get to this area, and that would have been pretty frustrating, because that first fight's really long. I suppose I could have, you know, taken damage and whatnot and exploited on restarting checkpoints. That's one way I could have done it. But look how quick that was when you do 2 flares like that, instead of running around like an idiot for 4 minutes like I did on the other one. And then all you need to do is shoot him 13 times and he dies. And hopefully she'll help us on that because she's got a shotgun, and she did. Ooh, this is a dirty spawn. When you come in here to do the cache, they spawn a flanker right on you, and he can just hit you if he wants to. That time he decided not to, so I got lucky. And then when you go down the stairs to get the keys, there's going to be an assault guy that has either an axe or a hammer. This guy here. He's a cowboy with an axe. You don't have to kill him though, because when you go into the office, it triggers the sequence to transition to the next area. So come in here, make sure you pick up the heavy-duty lantern if you're not using one. Which I think I'm using one, right? Maybe I wasn't. Damn. I thought I had the big dick one. Ooh, and we get some flashbangs too. You get a lot of flashbangs on this level, and it's because of the helicopter sequence that's coming up after this compound here, this courtyard. So we're pretty deep in this at the moment, and I haven't really mentioned the history with this game and the trouble that it went through before it was released. I touched on it a little bit when I talked about the driving sequence and how much Remedy modelled for what they originally envisioned the game to be. But there's some documentaries that you can watch, like the troubled history of Alan Wake and, you know, the struggles and whatnot. There's a couple from Remedy themselves, some making-ofs, and in particular there's a demo that they made. It was a prototype so that they could take it as a vertical slice and sell it for the idea of making a sequel to Alan Wake. It was an Alan Wake 2 like promotional material. Ooh, this is my favourite fight in the game, this, guys. You're outside the front of a church, and there's just a ton of enemies, and it's just you versus a ton of enemies, and there's nothing in this that's remotely cheesy. It's just straight up action and violence, and then at the end they spawn, I think it's 3 teleflankers, so you have to keep your head on a swivel. But this is where I think Alan Wake is the most fun for me, personally. But they made a prototype to get funding for production for Alan Wake 2, and they released it. I think Polygon released it on YouTube. I didn't see this, or if I did, I forgot. So they released it a couple of years ago, and I watched it the other night, and I was so just... I don't understand video games, dude. I appreciate that Alan Wake might not have been the biggest success it could have been. I appreciate that it was delayed into oblivion. I remember waiting for it. It took forever for the game to come out. It was a troubled production. It probably bled a lot of money. But Remedy had made something unique. They'd built something special. And they'd done all the hard work building it, so that whatever came next was going to be easier and better and far more efficient. So it was going to come quicker and hopefully make the profit that this game perhaps missed out on. So to me, if you're willing to give Remedy the time to make this game, you should at least give them time to show you that it was worth that investment, with a sequel that could build upon it and continue on this franchise that we all love. Except for DSP, fuck that guy. And instead they declined it. And then they went on to make Quantum Break. But if you watch that demo, dude, there's some cool stuff going on. Like, there's enemies interacting with the scenery and all kinds of context-sensitive moments that just give it these little flourishes and flares and details. It's the type of stuff you hear me on walkthroughs lamenting that we don't see anymore. This little bits of love, these little moments of just, oh my gosh, that's so sick. And I watched it, and I just thought it looked great. Obviously, it looked a bit rough visually. It was a prototype. You know, Alan had a different coat on, and I really wish they'd have given him, you know, like a 1911 or a Glock or something, given him some kind of automatic handgun or slightly better semi-auto instead of this revolver stuff with the single action and whatnot. I think that would have been a lovely contrast between, you know, this game and that game, a sense of progression. They could have given him a different torch as well, some kind of sick-ass industrial light that he carried with him because he'd learnt from his, you know, his encounters. But they showed an emphasis on stuff happening, and it looked like an evolution. You know, it looked like they were driving it forward, perhaps not crazily, because it was only a proof of concept. It would have got way better with production and development. This is kind of a pain in the ass as well. 2 of these assault axes and no way to take their shield down quickly. So you just have to run away and hope they don't hit you. And then she's shooting at him like a Goomba. But it was just a really nice elaboration on concepts and ideas and things they were looking for. And the idea was that there's a character called Mr. Scratch who went on to be in American Wasteland, bloody hell, Freudian slip, American Nightmare. Oh my god. And he was Alan Wake. He looks like Alan Wake. He was like an evil version of you, and he was killing people. And it was filmed in almost an interview format, like found footage. And it looked really, really interesting. And I don't know if it's personal bias because I love Alan Wake and I love Remedy and I know that they make great things if you give them a chance. It might be because I come from single-player games and they have such a fondness in my heart. I really do think single-player is so mislooked and often overlooked nowadays because people just don't seem to care. People think games are about killing other humans in deathmatch and nothing else is important, and that's cool, but you know, different strokes for different folks. I enjoy a good story, I enjoy a good shooting gallery, a nice little adventure, a romp that they design, and Remedy, they put their love and their heart into their games, and they're always fun, you know, they're always interesting, and for better and for worse, there's always something there you come away from thinking, wow, that was different. So it made me sad to see that prototype 10 years ago, and then we move all the way, you know, to now, and nothing came of it, and then recently we've had this news thanks to, you know, the remaster of Alan Wake, hopefully doing pretty well, and Remedy have been able to get the production to make the sequel. And they're changing the genre, which terrifies me, but I have faith. Oh, by the way, guys, this right here, terrible aim from me. I'm not going to make any excuses, it's 100% my hand, it's not the mousepad, it's not the mouse, it's just the sense. I struggled to get the sense in this game to be what I wanted. I couldn't use a converter at all, so I just had to make it as close as I could and then get used to it, and for the most I was okay. But for such sweeping motions like that, I was nowhere near where I needed to be. But it didn't stop me, and here is another really, really cool fight. So this is a multi-tiered fight against a bunch of dudes, and they give you so many flashbangs, you probably don't even have to fire a bullet here if you want to. You can literally flashbang everybody and use the explosive propane tanks. It's kind of insane how much stuff they give you here. This standoff could have been way longer too, and I think we have to give credit there. Once again, Remedy with immaculate timing in my opinion. The one good thing about a standoff that's far too long is usually it creates both dread and tension, and it's quite difficult. However, sections that last too long, that leave the player resenting them and actively fearing them, lead to both fatigue and a building of that resentment. Most people don't look fondly on Gauntlet bad checkpoints, they look back on them as being cheap as fuck and wishing they ended sooner. This is none of those things. This is a decent slice of action that's a ton of fun, that ends way sooner than you expect it to because you were preparing for war. And I kinda love that. The guide maker in me that wants to help people and hopes they have a tough time so that'll be necessary, he wants every single fight to be a gauntlet and to be so difficult you need my videos to succeed so it'll get millions of views. But the human being and the realist in me understands that that's just not how games work. That is a really silly thing to think. And I think that this section is more spectacle than it is demand. And it works. It's kind of a power fantasy shootout. You are very capable, you have all the tools you need, and if you can't do this, it's a you problem, it's not the game, and that's really refreshing. And there's a lot of dudes to kill here, so there's a lot of fun to be had, and I found standing over here was inadvertently a pretty good strategy. I don't remember how I used to do this part, but this one worked, so steal it and succeed. But I might have mentioned this earlier, I do forget if I have, and I apologise if I'm repeating myself, but sometimes it's okay. I think the 10-year gap between Alan Wake and Alan Wake 2 can be a really, really good thing. And I don't know what it'll mean for mechanics. I don't know what it'll mean for a lot of features along those lines, even though I hope it's for the better. But conceptually, and on an ideas plane, I think it's the best thing that sometimes can happen. And one of the things we know about Remedy is that they wanted Alan Wake 2 as much as we did. It wasn't that they didn't want to make it, it's that the producers didn't want to fund it because they didn't believe in its returns potential. And that's a horrible problem to have if you want to make a game, but a good problem to have if you want to make a good game. Because they have all the love and all the passion for the project, they just didn't have somebody trusting to say, do it, and here's the money. We'll worry about it later, you know? So 10 years passes, and Remedy tells us that all the time in between projects, they were constantly working on bits and pieces of Alan Wake. Be it engine stuff, be it, you know, thinking about mechanics and concepts and scenarios and little flourishes here and there. So think about it, guys. 10 years of coming up with ideas for set pieces, of mechanical nuance and different things that could be super interesting, and enemies and enemy types and certain engagements. 10 years is a long time for people who make games, and it's a long time to ferment some ideas. And there's two ways this can go. There's a fork here that leads to good things and a fork here that leads to bad things. The good fork is a game that has so much going for it because it's been laboured over to the point of an extreme amount of infinite detail that leads to a superb, fully realised vision that could not have been made in 3 years. That's the good side, right? The bad side is if there's too many chefs in the kitchen and it's just a jumbled, garbled, over-ambitious, like schizophrenic mess. Even though that's probably the misuse of schizophrenia because, you know, that happens a lot. But you get what I mean. And I'm hoping, of course, it's the good side, because nobody wants a game to be bad, but we all know that sometimes games can be in development for too long and it leads to bad things. But Alan Wake, baby. Alan Wake 2. It's happening, and it's... Think about the games that have released since 2010. Think about it. All the survival horror improvements that have happened, all the different experiences. You know, the creator of survival horror going on to make Evil Within a really strange game. The inception of all these like photography-based running away hiding simulators. You know, look at what Resident Evil's been up to. So many different horror games have come and gone. All these derivative Silent Hills that people are not too fond of. All the Fatal Frame sequels, and you know, we've had so much, the Capcom remakes, and when you really think about it, there's such a wealth of systems and details to think about. You saying you're doing survival horror it's really gonna put out there it's putting a target on your back, really. It's saying that we're ready to hit with the real bangers now and see where we stand and see if we can make something different. And I think that the genre needs it, I really do. Because I don't think that Resident Evil 8 is survival horror, and I don't think Resident Evil 7 is either. Hell, I know Resident Evil 6 bloody isn't. Resident Evil 5 is not even remotely close to it. Hell, even Resident Evil 4 is probably not close to it. Like, we haven't had survival horror for a long time. We've had these amalgamations of ridiculous Michael Bay action horror. So it'll be interesting to see what they do, especially coming from a psychological aspect. Because psychology is a different type of horror, you know? But here we are at the Bright Falls Dam, or the power station, and we're taking on a pair of Taken that are being backed up by an Assault who has a pickaxe, and he's out for blood, this guy. And you can use those like superconductors, I don't know what you would call those things. You can use those electric pylon things, those Tesla coils from Command & Conquer. You can use those bad boys to electrocute these guys and kill them quickly. And the best way to do it, dodge them near them, bait them near them, dodge them, then use a flare to push them into it. And you'll kill them with one flare. But I'm just going to fight them the old-fashioned way using the good old trusty revolver. Look at that, did you see that? I'm telling you, boys and girls, these fucking... I know what you did last summer, bitches, when they start throwing their weird weapons. They just do not miss. They're like Steven Seagal with a kitchen knife in the movies before he got fat. But we've got another Assault guy here pushing us. He's got an axe too, and this guy is getting bursted, which is nice, boosting the torch to knock him back. Before I made this run, I say before I made this run, that's a lie. After I made this run, I went back to watch some of the speed runs for this game, and I glanced through one of them. It doesn't really have that big of a community, it seems. And the time was about 2 hours and 45 minutes, which is obviously very good compared to my pitiful 10 hours. But I was hoping that I'd see something that would really be like, oh wow, that's fascinating. Because when I went back and I looked at Mirror's Edge was absurd. That just made me feel ashamed about what I'd made, because they were so good, you know. Which is really nice. It's nice to be inspired like that, to show you that if you put time in a game, you can really, really learn it and reap the rewards. This is a cool segment here where it pinches you with the 2 Assaults. But once again, taking the shield down it's kind of annoying. Self-inflicted, but annoying. But when I was looking at it, I was hoping that they'd have a movement tech. You'll notice I do sprint into jump a lot. Sprint, jump, sprint, jump, sprint, jump. Because when you hold sprint in this game, Alan sprints for like 5 seconds, then he starts having a cardiac arrest and has to keel over, and I really hate that. I hate how he gets tired really quick when you're trying to run away from stuff. This game is already teleporting enemies up your ass. Why do they have to make your sprint so shit? It doesn't resonate with me. I've played many games where the sprint was very good, and it didn't facilitate any less horror. And I don't understand this notion that I have to be a shit sprinter for the horror to be maintained. And hell, this is meant to be a psychological thriller, so it's not even that horror-y. It's just kind of unsettling, isn't it? But alas, here we are. And the sprint limit is really punishing for what it is. Most enemies are faster than you to begin with, and then when they swing they've got nuclear range, so your speed really doesn't matter. You could have been even faster and it wouldn't have made a damn bit of difference. But here's the rotating bridge. Piece of advice here, guys, when you step on this bridge, stand still. Do not do what I'm doing here, because if you do that, you'll get off the bridge sooner. I didn't realise that it rotates like this and I didn't one-cycle it, but what I did notice is if you push like I did just then, the birds have a real issue getting to you, because they have to rotate in a certain fashion, and they never ever got to a point where they could engage me properly, quickly enough, because their pathing wasn't designed well enough. So right now, as long as you put the torch on them and they turn around, they don't seem to come close enough to you, and you are completely safe and you don't have to boost your torch at all. The bad part is you rotate an additional time, which you didn't need to do. But I did think that this was an interesting strategy, because it just kind of happened by accident. And some of the best strategies are the ones that you stumble upon by accident. But keep on torching them. And I was looking at things on that speedrun like damage. What does he do to kill things quickly? You know, what is the go-to super sick damage on this game? And then he never needed to do it because he runs past everything. So you didn't see how he kills things quick. He doesn't fight hardly any of the bosses because he just gets rid of those guys real quick by running away. And that's when you realise, isn't it, that speedruns a lot of the time, you have to get really lucky for the speedrun to be very gameplay focused. And if you get a good gameplay focused speedrun where they have to play the game, they just have to do so with a level of mastery that takes years, you get something really interesting and something really cool. But if you watch most speedruns, it's generally just they run away from everything and get it done really quick. And that's awesome too, and if you're into that, then that's even better. But I like seeing, you know, just the super optimized paths that people come up with. That was the stuff I was looking forward to. And this is another sequence where I spent a while fighting it, ended up getting hit, and then I decided to just run to the light. There's a Zane cache to the left here that you can go and grab. This might be rare footage if you've seen me do that, but be very careful, because when you're doing this, you can enable the ambient spawn to happen, and you might have those guys rushing you down. But there's a lot of flashbangs there. Did you see him? So be very careful. I've already mentioned this, but I'll say it again just in case you didn't hear it. The enemies can attack you from off screen. Did you see that? That guy just threw a silent axe and it nearly hit me. It's a miracle that it didn't hit me, actually. The amount of times I've been hit on this, I could make a montage that's maybe 15 minutes long where it's just hit, 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 hit. So many axes, dude. Absolutely ridiculous. And look, the screen again. The screen is morphing, telling us that we're about to be assailed. So this is a really cinematic moment coming up. It spawns a bunch of flankers, and all you have to do is drop into the power station's ground. And I pop a flare here because I panic, and it's the super cinematic motion. And then none of them could get to me because they're all stuck on that cliff, and I could just walk away, which I thought was kind of interesting. Look at that, and they all despawned. But once you've interacted with the cutscenes and you've talked to the Lady of the Light, you can then come into this area and start messing around with some sluice gates and some Scooby-Doo fisherman ghosts. And we've got an assault there, combined with 2 Takens, and they're ranged boys, so they're throwing everything they've got at you. I really hope they bring back the throwing stuff, but it'd be really nice if they could ground it in something that's less stupid. It'd be really nice if they had to pick stuff up in order to throw it, or if they were equipped with stuff. For instance, a mechanic who's got one of those belts full of tools, and he's pulling things off his belt and throwing that, and he's only got a certain amount of them, and every time he pulls them off, they're gone. And then afterwards, once he's finished throwing shit at you, he has to go and pick something back up or break something off. I think that would be really nice dynamically, because he'd have to go up to a fence and rip off a piece of wood instead of just, I have 50 wrenches in my pockets because I'm a dickhead, which is what these guys do. They got Mary Poppins pockets and they don't miss. And it's silly, isn't it? Because you know when you think about Resident Evil 4? On Resident Evil 4, the zombies throw shit at you all the time. It's one of the things that makes that game really tricky to no damage. But you can shoot the stuff they throw at you, and it's really, really slow. Like, they throw it up into the air and it comes down. Whereas in this game, they just pelt it. The amount of times I got surprised, and at first, when I first started this run, it was funny. I legitimately thought it was funny. I was laughing. I was like, Jesus Christ, these guys are nuts. But you know, after it happens to you 30 times, it becomes less funny. And I would imagine that you can shoot the axes out of the air and whatnot. And if you're good enough, you'll just stun them with the burst. You know, you boost the lamp and get them that way. But if I never get hit by another axe, I'll be happy. But there was a transition to the flock now. So we've got more birds attacking us as we move towards the top of this dam. This is the part of the game where I started not to really remember what was going to happen. It had been a little bit too long. I ended up remembering most of this dam level, but I did not remember the episode after this departure. And funnily enough, I remembered the areas in American Nightmare, because that game takes areas from this game and it makes them massive fights. And there's one of them coming up in the final episode where you go into an abandoned village and you use a big light to shine on some people, and it's a really underwhelming fight actually. When you play that, I think it's a side mission in like an arcade mode on American Nightmare, and that place is filled with dudes. It's a survival mode and it's really hard. And I remember that. So I thought that was going to be a huge fight when I got there on this, but it turns out it's a completely different game. And then here is when you regroup with Barry and Lady Breaker. And this is a really big fight, which I had a really, really good piece of footage of me fighting it all the way up until the last few dudes, and then I got hit by an axe. And then I tried a couple more times and I kept getting hit by axes, and then in the end I just threw some flashbangs and destroyed everybody because I have a preposterous amount of flashbangs, and why not? Like, this is one of those moments again where if I were ever to do an Alan Wake project again, maybe in 10 years, I don't imagine that will happen in 10 years, who knows? Is this 2? Yeah, 2 teleflankers. This is interesting, this as well, because with Barry and her, you've got a lot of bait. And these guys have a difficult time. And if you can get these dudes to go up against an object that can have physics applied to it, they make this horrible noise of something revving into something else. It's this wonderful collision glitch sound. And then it happens, I think, later on in the game. But this is all about just track them, shine them, and as soon as they show you that they're going to come in and attack, boost the torch, interrupt them, and then finish them off. I'm still kind of surprised that you can kill these guys with... Is it 2? Yeah, 2! 2 hunting round bullets kills a teleflanker. That's how strong that gun is. Pretty crazy. I love that effect as well. There's a lot of good design in this game that I've not really mentioned because it's kind of self-evident. Back when this game came out, it wasn't quite as self-evident, and it was something I spent a lot of time talking about, but now most games do it all the time. So when you kill the final enemy, you'll notice you get that little bit of freeze frame and it goes white, and then it speeds back up. You can also hear certain noises that tell you certain things are happening. One of my favourites is when you go into the Halos of Light, the checkpoint makes a very distinctive drum, and it tells you that you've just essentially saved. And I love that kind of feedback, because even if you don't know you're noticing it, your brain is, and it's really important. And this is a sequence where you have to wait for this lift to come down, and there's a bunch of dudes that are going to attack you, but you have so many resources here, and you have quite the firing squad thanks to the people that are with you, that there's no reason for this to be too difficult at all. So just make sure to stun them by boosting the torch, kill the ones that are shroudless, and then get the hell out of there. And when it opens up right now, you can leave. You don't have to continue fighting, but I wanted to fight. I was really having a good time. I like the segments when you escort people in this game, except for the first one, when you're going to Lover's Peak, because you don't have a gun. That one's annoying as fuck. But these ones, where it's you and a few people, they feel really fun. And they show me that this game could have had co-op. This game really could have been co-op, and if they were to add co-op to it, it would be so cool in the sequel to have the option to do that. But here we go again, possessed furniture, the hardest thing in the game, rip. But we do have the big boy torch, and it makes a huge difference. Look at this torch, dude. Oh my god. I'd love to use this torch from the start. Can you imagine if there was a cheeky thing you could do and you found one really early? There's the Dark Presence getting super pissed off because we're getting towards the end of the game. And then we have more birds. So whenever you see that moment there, guys, where I pop a flare, it means I'm either going to run, or the spawn of the birds is so bullshit you can take damage without really being able to do much. And most of the flock sequences are fine. I haven't had too many problems with them, other than I didn't know it was coming from there and it hit me, I'll restart. But one of them later on, which I will point out when it turns up, one of them is just cheating. It's total dog shit. And this is really cool, this is another one of those gimmicks I didn't remember. So you get this spotlight, this bat signal, and this thing shreds, dude. This is the Troika of Alan Wake. I wish you fought some kind of big... I think the final boss should have had this. I think you should have been like running around that great tornado, jumping between, you know, flying buses and shit, fighting a couple of Haunted, and then you got to one of these and you had to shoot at some kind of crazy presence and stuff and hit it with this super light. I think that would have been great. I would have loved to have seen them do some kind of combat section with this that wasn't just popcorn and making you feel really powerful, because the enemy can't do anything against this. They can't throw axes because you're covered by the back plate of the huge light, and the beam kills them so quickly that they don't stand a chance. And I don't mind, because once again, I mentioned earlier, didn't I? Remedy are really good at every so often throwing something new into the mix, spicing it up, developing something different, and this is another one of those moments. Intrinsically, this is just a mounted gun sequence which we saw on the 360 generation on almost every game that was released, but it's done in such a way that it's not immediately clear that that's what it is. And that's why it works. That's the true mastery, I think, of what Remedy do, and one of the reasons why I think Sam Lake and his team are geniuses. And I always said as well, I've said it across the years, if I was ever to be able to work at a company for video games and game development, Remedy would be one of those companies. Because I feel like the people there, they love games as much as I do. And everybody says they love games, but half the time, you know, they just say that to say that. You know, they're not there putting out strong opinions, they're not there on some hill somewhere with a shield dying towards controversial opinions. You know, they're not even actually playing them. There's a lot of people in development teams now that, you know, they're doing it for the money because they're programmers and they learned to program. They didn't learn to program for video games specifically. They learned to program because that's where they ended up finding themselves, and games just kind of turned up and was the money they needed. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think if you do a good job, regardless of the intention, you know, that's a respectable and an honourable thing to do. But I want people who make games to want to make games, and I want them to be people who love games. And I think that this game in particular shows you that. It shows you just what happens when people get together and are truly passionate about what they're making. And this game is not without flaws, it's not without issues. The joy of the way I've edited this walkthrough, with it just being all the combat and all the moments where you can actually take damage instead of the puzzles and the experimentation and the navigation, like, you don't see some of the goofier, jankier bits that didn't quite work. So it's easier for me to just kind of glaze over them, because you don't see them. But it doesn't mean they don't exist, you know. And then here we go, ladies and gentlemen, the final chapter, Departure. This is one of the hardest chapters in the game as well, and it's just purely because it has that bridge with a fucking crane on it. By far the most difficult part of the run, just because of how much it pissed me off. And I don't know if you have this, guys, but I know I do. There's like several different mediations of difficulty and how it's registered in my brain. You have the difficulty that is hard, and I don't know whether or not I can do it, so it's demoralizing and it's scary. You have the difficulty where it's hard because it's probably badly designed and I know I can do it, but I don't know if I care enough to do it. And then you have the difficulty that isn't hard, I know I can do it, but I just don't fucking want to because it's really irritating me. These are the strongest series of difficulty, like milestones in my brain that I come across a lot. And the bridge is the latter, it's the last one. It's not hard, it's not good, it's just shit, and I hate it. And if there were checkpoints before the crane or in the middle of that, it would be way better, because you wouldn't be constantly just bored out your fucking brain trying to kill furniture, but alas you are. It's like some kind of nightmare of Luigi's Mansion, but instead of being Luigi and being really good and having an awesome Hoover, you've got this light that barely works. And I can honestly say most of this game was a nice amount of challenge and a lot of fun. And aside from a couple of bad checkpoints and a couple of moments where I was getting really frustrated from getting hit when I was running through sequences, those early moments where you're constantly running to the light and it's kind of showing you that you don't have to fight everyone, those parts are really frustrating. Because it's so easy to get randomly Kobe'd by the fucking mechanics and fishermen and everything. But this is the part, this is the one that stands with me. I think this is probably one of the hardest bits of the game. On a casual run as well. Because it doesn't matter what you've got here. Unless you choose to use flare guns, or flares, or flashbangs, everyone's in the same boat, you know. This is a challenge run with restrictions, but even if you're doing a casual run, you have to do what I'm doing here. There's no way getting around what's happening here. Then when you add the ability to not put the batteries in and some of the other things I'm doing, this becomes just amplified to the point of really showcasing why I think the possessed items are the weakest part of the game. And I think a lot of it stems from the physics. When these things fly, after their initial fly, everything is random. The way they bounce, where they end up, where they go. What I didn't mention, guys, and I need to mention it now because it's on tangent, right at the start of this guide, when I went through the nightmare on the tutorial and I run on that bridge and I'm going towards that church, go back and watch that footage again. Notice where I placed the camera. Did you notice that I looked to the right before I went towards the door, even though there were no enemies, there are no enemies, and nothing's happening? The reason I did that, guys, is when I got this game to test whether or not it was worthy of doing a walkthrough and I could get it into a playable state, I was hit by a barrel that was flung from the tornado. And it hit me as I was going for the door. So every time I've replayed that segment, I've looked to the right to see where the barrel comes from, and it never happened again. I've now done that level about 7 times, and I've never been hit by the barrel. But that first time, it straight up nuked me. And because of my intention was no damage, I thought, oh damn, there's a bloody barrel here, I've got to look out for it. And it turns out, never happened again. And that's why this is frustrating. Because some of the shit that happens when you apply physics and frame rate and all that kind of nonsense to this, it gets confusing quick. And then to make matters worse, I had to re-record this twice. But it was kind of an ego boost, that, because I was so sharp on the game that when I came back to re-record it, I first attempted the whole sequence from start to finish, which was really nice. Because when I was doing it in the original recording, it took me like 20 attempts because I was getting really annoyed and really frustrated. And I don't know about you guys, but when I get pissed off and annoyed, I play worse because I get impatient. Whereas I came back to this after I'd done the edit. You know, I was balls deep into the edit at that point. It was practically in post. And then I had to come back and do this. And then I re-recorded it, and the footage was corrupted somehow. And then I had to come back and re-record it again, and I got it again. So that was really nice to come back and shit on this sequence. And then here we have the crane. So the crane is kind of easy, but the problem with him is if you let him bang the ground too much, he'll break the bridge and you fall down. So if you use 3 flashbangs, you'll kill him. And usually I don't want to do this, but on this I'll make an exception. Because there's no checkpoint until you get outside this room. You have to start at the beginning of the bridge and do all of that again. And here's the thing, right? Here's the testing I did on this. I found that spot where he can't hit you until he breaks the bridge. I messed around dodging him to see how effective that would be. And I messed around with the torch to see if I could do it with a War of Attrition. And as it stands, the best thing I could do was burn 2 flares, hit it with the torch, in between the flares to really maximise on hitting it with the battery, and then finishing it off with a flashbang. So I managed to do, I think, 3 flares, 2 full torches, 1 or 2 flashbangs, and it died. And that was as good as I could get it. So when I did the replays, and I played it again, I'm getting attacked by a possessed car here, which is fucking amazing. I had no idea about this dude, I'd completely forgotten about him, but what an interesting concept to have. Straight up Christine moment here. Car on car action. This is Twisted Metal at its finest, and it never turns up ever again. I mean, you could count the Dozers as, you know, car on car action, but I don't. That is a straight up, that is Christine right there. That's Stephen King embodied, and I can't think of anything more appropriate. But when I came back on those re-recordings, I went into that fight and I tested all my flares to see if I could kill it with just flares, and it took too many flares. And then in the end I tested with the flashbangs and 3 did it, so I don't think using 3 flashbangs on that sequence is much of a casualty, and I don't miss them. And the sequence coming up here could have been a really, really good section, but the spawns are horrible. And I get bummed, which was really frustrating. So this next section, I fought everyone. I fought everybody for about 5 or 6 minutes, and it was really cool. And then right at the end, it spawns 3 flankers behind me silently, and they just beat me up. And everything I did was gone, because the checkpoint is all the way back in the car. And then the footage you're watching now is I just run past everything. And this is a pretty in-depth sequence too. There's a lot of people here, there's a lot of the dark goo on the ground that hurts you, and there is a very diverse amount of enemies. There's lots of propane tanks. This is a cool fight. But do you see what happened there where it showed me them falling in? It doesn't do that the next time it brings them in. And it sucks, guys, it really does. It's one of those things that I always mention in these videos, but you might not really get across just how heartbreaking it can be. Some of the best footage I have in this guide, you never will see, because it all got cut for reasons like that. And as much as I'd like to make side videos about all the, the cool moments and all the sick bits that I know people would appreciate, because there's some of my crazy fans are really into seeing everything. They want to watch everything. They like the details. They like the exclusive stuff. But a lot of that footage and those kind of videos, they don't do as well as the walkthroughs do. And at this moment in time, I've got a decent amount of momentum on YouTube, so I'd really like to capitalise on that. And who knows, fingers crossed, when I upload a video, it might go out to the people who've actually subscribed for me for once. 2022 could be a really, really good year, it could be a healthy year, a positive year, and a year of growth. But it won't be if people don't look at the videos that do hit their subscription feed, because then it doesn't get put out for more people, and it's one of those things where you're at the mercy of. I've been watching this YouTuber recently that looks into the downfall, of YouTubers, and he makes rather critical and assumptive kind of documentaries about their stories, and he takes a little bit of truth and a little bit of hyperbole and kind of mashes it together, and for the most it's fun and schlocky and popcorny, but every so often he has some interesting hot takes which are just flat out wrong. and I think it's kind of interesting that he's been so successful on YouTube by making those kind of drama videos, because if he'd not, I think some of his opinions would be different, because some of the stuff he said for the reasons why people lose subscribers and the reasons why people aren't big on YouTube are really not as true as I think he believes them to be, and they seem like he's projecting. Because this idea that the reason people don't grow on YouTube is because they make garbage content is, as fun as that sounds and as controversial as that is, I just don't really think that that's true. I see a lot of really, really good content on YouTube that doesn't get a lot of views, and it doesn't mean it's trash. I do believe that to some people everything is trash, it doesn't matter what it is, but in order to go forward with that kind of leap of logic would for me to think that this video that I've made here is trash, and it objectively isn't, You can dislike it, you can not enjoy it, that's fine, but objectively, it is not trash, and even if it gets 2,000 views, that doesn't mean it's trash either. So this kind of logic with YouTube is, I think it's easy to have that opinion when you're winning, but if you've ever come from a perspective of, being downtrodden and not winning, and out of the good grace of the algorithm, looking at it that way, it seems a little bit black and white and a bit absolute, and I just don't think that it is that. I think there's a lot more grey there. And speaking of grey, I had a really, 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 really frustrating time here trying to get a super sick strategy, because every time you take damage here, you have to do this again. You have to climb this ladder, and you have to pull this generator, and then you have to drop down. And if you drop down on the side here like this, you don't take damage. If you just run off that and you land, you'll take damage, so be very careful dropping there. But the idea here is, you can drop a flare, or drop 2 flares if you're lucky, throw a flashbang, get in your car, full beam the dozer, and if you fully full beam him, you'll kill him. But depending on what he does and how he pushes you and how much damage he does, he might knock you out of the car, and if he does that, you'll climb on top of it and you'll take damage instantly. And this turns into a very awkward and difficult fight, because you'll have to retry. And you've already lost. So this strategy here was just a combination of using my tools to get rid of him. And it was just because of the checkpoint. If the checkpoint had been at that cutscene showing the Dozer waking up, I would have grinded that until I got a really fancy and impressive looking strategy, which you would have tried yourself and it wouldn't have worked and you'd have called me a hack immediately. Because that's the best thing about walkthroughs, isn't it, guys, where people think that it works that way every single time, and some strategies unfortunately rely on luck and aren't that consistent but do work eventually. And then you get those angry dudes that try it once for 30 seconds and then immediately come back and wish death on your entire family. But this is the segment I was talking about, guys. This area here, this is, I think, a really big fight in American Nightmare. But in this game, you get to use this full beam, and this thing is unbelievable. Absolutely ridiculous. Like, can you imagine, though? Can you imagine in Alan Wake 2 if you could get that outfit that Gary Busey's team are using in Predator 2? So there's a segment of a movie where a bunch of off-the-grid, like black site, deep cover CIA scientist DARPA dudes are essentially hunting an alien. They're hunting this alien and they're watching its habits and its patterns, and they've come up with this idea of trying to trap it by freezing it in a meat processing facility. And they've treated this facility so that it has got all kinds of fun shit going on inside. I don't know the specifics, guys. It's been a while since I've watched it. But they've sprayed it with this certain isotope that makes it so that he stands out against the background and they can see him better. And they're all wearing these super silver, science fiction, ridiculous hazmat suit things. And they've got these cryo cannons with huge backpacks and huge light beams on them. And the beams of light are picking up all the detritus and stuff in the air. And it all looks super sick and visually very interesting. Can you imagine Alan having that shit on and taking on some Taken? Straight up shoulder pads. He's got pauldrons full of high beams. And he's got a big cryo cannon that could actually be some kind of light-emitting crazy diode machine gun or something. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. But can you imagine the shit you could do? It could be so silly. Ooh, this is it, guys. This is one of the worst checkpoints in the game. So I'm going to come down and pick up the cash here, because Zane has left us some goodies, and just in case you need them, you want to grab them, because we're moving towards the end of the game here. And there's flashbangs, flare gun, rounds, all kinds of good stuff. Just a wonderful amount of ammunition. So this segment would not be a problem if the final bird spawn didn't spawn on you and immediately sweep and hit you. I had to do what you're watching now about 10 times. It was really annoying. And it's annoying because the first spawn of the birds comes from behind. Here's the first one. You can actually turn your lamp to face it so that the cutscene, you're burning the birds during the whole thing if you want. I did this a few times. I learnt it really, really well. I didn't put it in the final because, I didn't need to. And then you push this. And then as you do this, you jump across and there's a bird spawn in the mine to your left. And once again, you can put the beam on the mine's mouth so that when the cutscene triggers, you can burn them during the cutscene. And then you move around that L-shaped bend coming up, and the final spawn is a tripwire at the end of it. And I honestly can't tell you how to do this because I've done this 3 times now, and each time I've been successful, different things have happened. But what I can tell you is if you walk forward and flare on reaction, there's no guarantee it will work. I have flared this point dozens of times only to get hit, because the birds just completely circumvent the flare. It's really cheap. And I don't know if this is frame rate, I don't know if this is just a random bug, I don't know what it is, but this part here was the hardest part to no damage, because I couldn't trigger this spawn without these birds hitting me. Boom, hear that rustle of feathers? Right there, see that? They fly directly through the wood. If you walk that way, you're dead. There's nothing you can do. And then this section right here, guys. I think it's this one. It might be the next one, actually. Because this is the final ascent towards the area that's blocking Cauldron Lake. And then we can get it on with the Dark Presence. But of course, we've got some teleflankers, and they're going ham. But I do think one of the areas of Alan Wake's combat that you can critique is the enemy diversity. Oh, look, did you hear that? That noise right there is his movement into a piece of collision that's stopping him. That's what I mentioned earlier. That sounds so funny, that. Physics, you gotta love it. I think Remedy do a great job of mixing up what enemies they have for the full duration of the game. you'll notice that you take on a couple of standard taken, then you'll take on a heavy guy, then you might take on a flanker, then you might have a boss that's a teleflanker, right? Then you'll take on some possessed items, and you'll do some traversal, and you'll do a bit of driving or something different, and then you'll fight a vehicle or a boss. And then you'll maybe take on some birds, maybe take on some, you know, environmental stuff again, some possessed items, and then boom, you'll get some big guys again. And the way that they do that, I think, is really nice. I think it's elegantly done. But I do agree that there wasn't enough archetypes of enemies. This is something that I think that the pseudo sequel, the standalone game, fixed. They added a couple of extra dudes. This segment right now, guys, I'm going to upload a video of me doing this. I'm going to name it something like the worst checkpoint in the world or the worst spawn in the world. And I'm going to fight every single enemy you see here, which is a lot of enemies. It takes about 5 minutes. And then I'm going to activate a generator, and they're going to spawn him on me with a cinematic camera, and there's nothing I can do to get off it quick enough and do anything about it. And it's all wasted. And this is me running past everything and skipping it entirely because the game said fuck you, so I said fuck you back. And it's disappointing too because it was a lot of fun, but I'm not doing 5 minutes of constant action trying to get fucking shields off of these stupid dickheads. It's annoying as hell. And there's some interesting stuff you can do with this game as well. Some really interesting stuff. To give you an example, guys, I ended up putting in a code in my executable. And this is a piece of advice for people if you want to play on Nightmare without beating the game first. If you open up the shortcut and you put a command line, which is - developer commands, I think it is, or developer console, something like this. Watch this. Look at that. Look how lucky that was. Even then, running past everything, I could have been hit if he decided to attack me, but he didn't. That right there shows you normal flankers are more dangerous than teleflankers, because the teleflanker has to stop and alert you that he's charging, and the normal flanker doesn't. And that is why he's way worse. Back on topic though, as you duck some of these possessed items and these flailing items, I think one of the areas where they could have increased their arsenal of creatures and enemies to fight would have been by making more possessed animals. And I do think that you run the risk, don't you, of it being a bit silly and a bit cliche when you've got a lot of different, you know, stereotypical animals turning up. I think one of the criticisms that Resident Evil got, especially on Resident Evil 0, is the T-Virus got into animals and it's like, here's a zombie this and a zombie that, and it was just, you know, a zombie and insert animal, and everything kind of worked because it was a one-size-fitted-all. So this game only really did possessed crows, didn't it? The flock that attacks you, and I can't remember anything else if it did. I've already forgot. This is a cool fight, this, by the way, and you can use the electricity to help you out. So use it to get rid of the guy with the gold shroud if you can. It will be really helpful. And if you've got flashbangs, you can use those too. And you're absolutely loaded right now. Look at this. You don't even have to fight. You're so strong. It's absurd. But there's 2 of these gold boys knocking around, so we're going to use the environment to get rid of them. But they could have easily done, like, possessed wolves, you know? Wolves would have worked. You're in the middle of all these woods and forests and stuff, and I don't know if, you know, geographically there are any wolves here left. Maybe they've all gone away somewhere and it's just deer and stuff. But, you know, they could have used wolves maybe. They could have used rats. That could have been interesting, like a horde of rats turning up and causing havoc and chasing you around and things. And the light could have made them disperse like the scarabs in that Uncharted game that one time. You know, there could have been things like that. That could have been an interesting environmental hazard. I think they could have done environmental hazards a little bit more. I think the idea of the darkness juice everywhere, some of that could have maybe reached out for you and tried to get you, like, you know, in the Ghostbusters 2 movie with the slime in the bathtub. I think there could have been a few things they could have done, and it would have worked. But they didn't, and I kind of respect that. I kind of respect the reserve there, you know? But this is the final sequence before the end of the game, and it's a bunch of possessed barrels, the ultimate enemy of this game, and many vehicles that take an absurd amount of light to destroy. This is kind of the final barricade. It's more of a metaphorical barricade than any kind of threat, but they do summon Taken on you. And this is the point in the walkthrough where I realised there's several topics I wanted to mention and I simply forgot. And instead we talked about everything else, as that guy tries to hit me with an axe. But I'm going to use all my resources here because I know I don't need them for the end of the game. And I have a bit of a confession to make here, guys. And I tweeted about this, so you might already have been spoiled. But you can't beat this game revolver only, pistols only. You cannot actually beat the game. The final boss demands that you use the flare gun. And it demands that you use it 3 times. So I got to the end of this whole challenge run, and I spent about 35 minutes trying to figure out a way to finagle my way to victory, and it seems it's a scripted sequence. So until somebody comes up with a creative way of killing the final boss with the handgun, I am afraid that we didn't quite complete the challenge run as intended, because the game itself said no. And that's really disappointing in my opinion. But I think the final boss in this game's pretty fucking disappointing, if I'm honest. I think it's kind of shit. It's conceptually quite interesting, and it looks great, and it's got all this kind of voodoo going on, but what is demanded of the player is nowhere near as cool as some of the stuff you've done in this game. But I do think that this definitely inspired the DLC, because the DLC gets a lot more floaty and a lot more weird and surreal, doesn't it? But the first thing to do here is to drop a couple flares. Don't worry about flare gun ammunition, the game's going to give you a bucket load because it knows that you've got to use it. I checked out the IGN walkthrough for this as well, to see what they said in their walkthrough about some parts of this game, and it was so funny, dude. You know when a walkthrough says, oh, just go into this room and kill these 3 guys and then continue, and you can't kill those 3 guys because they're kicking your ass? Is that a real walkthrough then, do you think? Because I always think that's funny when it's like, oh, go into this room and kill this boss. Afterwards, you pick up this key. When they spend more time talking about the fucking key you picked up afterwards than they do how to beat the boss, you fundamentally failed to produce a walkthrough. And you spent more time talking about the unessential things that anybody could figure out effortlessly that take no real skill or ability or information, and you denied the person the shortcut to understanding how to overcome a situation quickly. I like this section as well, you know, this idea of tracking the objects to try and make them break quicker. The no batteries makes this so brutal. But there goes the first flare. After you shoot, I think it's 2 flares, you'll be attacked by birds, so make sure to pop a flare real quickly. Because here come the flock. Pop your flare when he finishes messing around. That gets them off you, and then fire the final flare, and that's the end of the game, guys. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and most importantly, you take care now.